So I'd like to call to order the January meeting of the Oregon Education Investment Board. First of all, I'd like to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Look forward to a great 2014 where we can see the results of some of the work that we've been doing, and I'm confident that we're on a good course. With that, Seth, could we do the roll call, please?
Governor Fitzhopper, Julia Graham Edwards, Yvonne Curtis,
Here.
Matthew Donegan, Samuel Henry,
Here.
Nicole June Maher,
Here.
Mark Mobihill,
Here.
David Reeves,
Here.
Ron Saxton,
Here.
Mary Spildy,
Here.
Kate Duran, Anna Vendry,
Here.
Dick Whitnell.
Here.
And just to check, do we have anyone on the phone? Okay, thank you. So first order of business is approval of the minutes from the November meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We'll turn it over to Nancy for her report.
Thank you. I wanted to say after being here about, 4 or 5 months, I've been in a lot of meetings, and I want to just encourage us to do a few things. One is to remember that our job is to think about the vision of 40-40-20 and the targets on the Achievement Compacts and make sure we're moving towards achieving what's on the Achievement Compacts. A lot of people have a lot of great ideas, and that's terrific. The ultimate question is that really going to move the dial on the targets, which we spent a very long process going through so we can reach those 40-40-20 goals. And I can assure you that that's the thing we're keeping in front of us. What we know is when we come up with investments or we restructure our current systems, some things can happen quicker than others, so there's some things we can do in a much shorter term, and some have a much longer term, but the ultimate thing is that we've got some very important targets. With that in mind, I really wanted to talk a little bit about the work we're doing between the early learning group and moving into kindergarten to 3rd grade, and we're beginning to think about this. We say 3 to 3, age 3 to grade 3, because we know at age 3 students start learning those very important literacy skills that are critical in order to make sure we do meet not only the Ready for Kindergarten target on the Achievement Compact, but the reading at 3rd grade level. We know that reading at 3rd grade puts us on a trajectory to be college and career ready. We have a laser focus on this. We're going to begin working very closely with early learning because we know it is the most proactive thing that we could do. So with that in mind, we have a new member who is part of the OEIB, whose focus is going to be working in partnership with early learning and really focused on kindergarten, the 3rd grade reading. I would like to introduce you to her now, and I have, this is Serena here. Do you want to come up for a minute? So this is Serena Stadmeyer Wesley. And could you just spend a few minutes talking about your background? I think you'll quickly see why we are thrilled to have her as part of the team.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Serena Stadmeyer Wesley, and I'm excited to be here working with Nancy and the team at OEIB. Recently I was just project manager for Multnomah County, working on the hub, bringing the community together in and around Multnomah County to collaborate on the hub and get that into place. I am currently a member of the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee, along with Commissioner Dan Salzman, and I have an extensive background in working in the community and around the community, and so I'm excited to bring all of that here as we get started and heading forward to as we get closer to making it a seamless process and ensuring that there is no wrong door for any of our students.
Thank you very much. We're thrilled to have you, and I think many of you know Doris McCune, who was with the OEIB, moved back to be with her family and her new husband, which is very reasonable, I think. And so we're sad to say goodbye to her, but we're thrilled to say hi to Serena.
want to recognize that a couple of people have joined us on the phone. Would you like to identify yourselves, please? Kane and Webb, I guess. Okay.
Well, Mary, one last thing, and I'm not sure if this took place in LCC, but I read all these articles, and access to college is really important. So in Lane County, there was a gathering where people, I think it's of young youth who came together to say, what are the various scholarships that are available? And what this article is saying is that there's a scholarship for tall people. So if you're 5.8, a girl, you're eligible for a scholarship, and if you're taller than 6.2, you're eligible for a scholarship. The person being quoted is a student I know from Thurston High School, Chris Matter. He's pretty tall, so I think he's probably 6.3, and he was really excited about this. So, but I think the message is there's scholarships out there more than we ever imagined. So that's a good thing.
Thank you, Nancy. Let's move on to subcommittee reports, and we'll start with Dr. Curtis. Sorry, you put me on the light there.
So I was trying to get my notes together since we just finished our meeting, and it was a very dense meeting with a lot of content. What I want to do is start with reminding the committee that we had some information or knowledge about work that had been done in Oregon around ELLs with an ELL collaborative, and that the initial recommendations from that group, some had moved forward to ODE and some had moved forward to a group that last year got together to form the ELL strategic plan. And in that plan, in the process of developing that plan, one of the things we identified is that we knew we needed to do a better job of collecting the data so we could understand the stories and find out where we were being successful with our ELL students. And one of the problems we had is that as soon as the student was exited from the program, we often lost track of their data, and because they weren't still identified. So today when Brian Reeder shared with us from ODE some data, what he did was define that we are now able to keep track of students' data if they were ever ELL. So I like that term, ever ELL. At least we know that we're keeping track of those students. Brian has brought to our committee some data. It's a study he's doing around the cohort data, particularly a group of 5th grade students who've gone through the system to learn about the outcomes of students depending on their years in the ELD program, to see if we can learn if that tells us something about them. And there's definitely some good information there, and that's as compared to non-limited English proficient students. We continue to ask questions as we dig down into that data. 2 of our subcommittee members will be looking at that data again and probably giving some more questions to Brian. He'll bring back more data, and at some point we'll be able to bring back maybe some things that we've learned and maybe some things that ODE will help us to identify need to be done in order to take the barriers out for students. One of the things we did learn is that if students continue to stay in the ELL program all the way through their high school experience, they're not as likely to graduate from high school. That if they exit before they get to high school, they're more likely to graduate. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we'll bring that information to you. Another area that was addressed when the ELL Collaborative met many years ago was this idea of identifying a dual language certification program, and I'm very happy to say, thanks to the work with TSPC and partners, that they have identified and approved a dual language certification program, and just at their very last meeting, and are working on the rules, and then we'll move forward to communicate with higher education institutions and start to allow people to bring proposals for their programs forward. In addition to that, TSPC with partners has been working on another request of that group, and that was that we help all educators attain the knowledge and skill and attitudes or beliefs necessary to effectively educate our ELL students. And they had a conversation. The conversation reached a challenging point. Because what we know is if we're going to prepare our beginning teachers or our candidates in the programs, We also need to make sure that all the faculty who are teaching them have those same beliefs, skills, and all of that. And that is challenging because it requires a whole lot of retooling of people who've kind of already been through the system. It also requires dollars and some reorganization. So we will continue to work, two of us from the committee will be meeting with Vicki and Keith, and we want to learn more about what the challenges are and how we as a best practice and transitions committee can help move us forward on some of those. In addition to that, the other area that we're taking a look at is, we've heard twice now from the Chalkboard Project around the work they're doing with cooperating teachers. And one of the things that we asked about is wanting to know more about how we can incentivize our strongest teachers to become cooperating teachers for our students who are in teacher preparation programs. Right now, we have some barriers that we've created unintentionally, for example, by the evaluation system, where teachers, if they're responsible for those students and it's going to impact their evaluation, then oftentimes they don't want to let go of their classroom to somebody who's just starting. That's just a small example of the kinds of things sometimes we create, these great ideas and processes and initiatives, and then we create new barriers. So we're trying to stay on top of what are those barriers, and a great suggestion Mark had was that we put together a process whereby we get a chance to hear from teachers what would incentivize them to play that role as cooperating teachers. So OEIB team will be working with Chalkboard and other partners to put together that process. We also are learning from Chalkboard about what they're learning about the challenges in our rural communities, and we've asked ODE, we will be asking ODE and OEIB to continue to work on a couple of areas they came up in our conversation. One of them is the idea around perhaps some of our state initiatives need to be differentiated in the rural communities because of the barriers that they experience. And so hoping that we work together and continue to learn from Chalkboard's work in the rural areas, and to see if we can have some of those people involved as ODE and OEIB roll out some of the strategies and differentiate them so that they take into consideration the local context and also the culture of the rural communities in order to overcome some of those barriers. We also heard a report about the Eastern Promise and the additional funds that will be available for some other grants to look at, maybe not exactly mirroring that, but taking the pillars from the Eastern Promise and applying it to maybe some new approaches, hoping that as a state we learn about various models that could work on helping students get college earlier. I'll just generalize it in that way. We also heard about the work from the Accelerated Learning Committee that's talking again about how we get college early and the barriers and the challenges that are there in the system already. And the last thing we talked about today, so I guess more to come on that one, that is, I think there's some work in that committee that is related to some work that's going on at the HEC, and again, another opportunity for those committees to work together. And the last thing we took a look at is we had asked about the work being done around the college and career readiness definition, and we did see a draft. We suggested a little bit of context be added to that draft college and career readiness definition, and we will be bringing that back to OEIB at the next meeting. In terms of process, I'll just share one of the things we are trying to do as a committee is have committee members identify themselves with some of the topics, learn a little bit more, and bring ideas back to the committee, because we have so many, as I said, meaty areas that we're looking at. And the other one is we're working with a document of asking in all of these areas where we want OEIB eventually to be the barrier buster or to help push through policy changes, that they would provide for us, here's what we're asking from you, and here's kind of the information you need to know. How does it apply to the equity lens? Who does it impact? And so on. So we'll be bringing recommendations to you in that format so that you have some of that information as an OEIB board, because we get a chance to look deeper into some of those topics as a committee. So I'm going to ask my other committee members, did I miss anything, or is there anything you'd like to add to that? I will say that we also had a meeting in December, and there's still some carryover, and I will refer just in a closing comment to the chart that I shared with you at our last OEIB meeting. We do have a chart that shows all the topics we're dealing with and when we will bring recommendations to OEIB. We continue to update that and adjust that, and thanks to Hilda's great organization and networking with all the other work that's going on. One of the things that we were thinking about today is the crossover in many of our initiatives around this idea of collective impact. And maybe at some point in time, there will be an opportunity, and it sounds like the OEIB team has already been working on that, but we should be convening not only the people who get, for example, the Early Learning Hub grants and the regional collaborative grants, and the last one, the Eastern Promise, what is that one called? Scaling Up Eastern Promise? Okay, replication grant, thank you. So there are people who will get selected for those, but those are small, those are little pockets where we want to learn something. And there's many of us trying to go about this work that haven't gotten to the point where we're successful enough to actually apply or get one of those grants, but we still are going forward with the work. And that's happening, I know, across the state and talking to my colleagues. So I think that we need to have a forum or something where we come together and say, what lessons have we learned? What do we want to continue to learn together, and how do we scale up maybe more quickly? So that's it for my report.
Thanks, Yvonne. Before we take any comments or questions, I think someone joined us on the phone.
Hi, this is Kate Rand. I did join you on the phone.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Welcome, and we'll show that you're present for the record.
Thank you.
Any comments, questions, feedback for Yvonne and her committee? Ken?
Just, there's we were talking about ESL issues, depending on who you talk to, use that acronym, but there's a big meeting coming to Oregon, a national meeting of teachers of English as a second language, March 26th. And if anyone from the committee would like some information on that, I'd be happy to. I just met up with one of the leaders from that last night, who's very excited about the opportunity to bring some national leaders in on ESL issues.
Great, I believe that's nice. Anyone else? Seeing none, let's move on to Nicole, Equity and Partnerships.
So we are on track with our work. I want to thank Whitney for her help, and also echo the warm welcome of Serena, who I know will help us advance our work quite well. Just as a sort of overarching reminder about where we're going in this next year of work, we're really narrowing our focus to complete some concrete policy recommendations around out-of-school youth and supporting them to return to school or find other positive options. We'd like to also complete some policy recommendations around community engagement and partnership with the community, as well as policy recommendations around supporting students with disabilities better. Our focus in the last month and a half has really been outlining our policy recommendations and creating that structure for that document, particularly around out-of-school youth. And so we met this morning and we took some time to really start that work and have a deeper dialogue about the values that we want that document to express and what the content of that work will look like. And in addition to that, we are continuing to look at ways that we can support the equity lens fully being rolled out, not only throughout the Department of Education, but through all of our partnering organizations, and had a good conversation about how we can support institutions of higher education. We're very pleased that the HEC has adopted the policy and want to think of other ways that we can continue to support and hold institutions of higher education accountable to adopt the equity lens. And we need to, frankly, have similar conversations about how that looks in early childhood and at the local district level. So one piece I would just say that is important that we talked about today is really in line with what Nancy mentioned this morning, that as we go out our equity lens, we also need to keep reminding ourselves about the achievement complex and why we chose the outcomes in those achievement complex and how many of those goals tie directly to our success in equity work as well. And so that was an important piece that I think we're going to try to do a better job incorporating into our policy work. We invite other committee members to share if I want to anything out. Any questions?
If not, any questions or feedback? Seeing none, thank you, Nicole.
Mary, this is
Yes.
Kim Tran. Can I hear Nicole at all?
Okay, we'll see if we can do something about it. We're going to try and move the receiver to a more central place, so we'll see if that works, but please speak up if you can't hear as we move to the next committee report, which is Dick Whitnell, Outcomes and Investments.
Yes, Madam Chair, we met on December 12th. I think it was a warm 15-degree day. And also I'd like to bring we have enough attorneys on this board to talk about truth in advertising. We met with Pam Curtis and her up there at OHSU, and about the parking. It took me 45 minutes to find a parking spot and then an hour to find where my car was when I was done. But I do like to thank Pam for hosting us and also thank my fellow members, Anna Vanderleen, Ron Saxon, and Pam Curtis, as I said, Duncan Wise, and also for David Edwards to support us as the support person through the Education Department. We met, as I said, on December 12th to review and discuss 3 essential items: a draft of OEIB scoreboard, plan for developing a database for a student database, and an update on now concluded achievement compact assessment research. The main purpose of the OEIB scoreboard is twofold: to help the board track the state's progress in 40-40-20 and to monitor the implementation of the key board strategies and action steps. The subcommittee has reviewed a 3rd draft of the scoreboard, anticipates another review this prior month to introduce it to the board in February and for further discussion. And then, of course, when it's finalized, the scoreboard will be updated quarterly so we can serve as a timely progress report and see how we're doing. The database plan will be introduced as part of today's meeting by Peter Trumby, so there's no more reason to really go into detail now, and he'll bring us up to date there. The main thing is that the subcommittee considers this plan is crucial to ensuring that we, as the full board, have the data necessary to make informed policy and budget decisions. We appreciate the work that's been done and the plan so far and look forward to a robust discussion about that. Also, the subcommittee received an update on the Achievement Compact Assessment research conducted by the Office of the Chief Education Officer. The draft research report was submitted by Dr. Golden last week, and the subcommittee anticipates receiving another update until the 23rd of this month. We anticipate the board will receive final recommendations based on this report at its March meeting. And just by definition, if I can add here, just by definition of our subcommittee outcomes and investments, I'm sure each member on this subcommittee, when they are out from here, there's questions about outcomes. And so we will be focused on some type of scoreboard to make sure that we're getting to that 40-40-20 as the governor has outlined for us, and that whether or not we're getting towards that.
So Kay, let me check in with you first. Can you hear now? Apparently not. I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about that. Okay, any questions for Dick? Comments? Okay, let's move on then to the next part of our agenda, which we're going to have 2 presentations, 2 separate presentations on 40-40-20 this afternoon. And so I'd like to invite David Yaden, State Board of Higher Education, and John Tapania from Eco Northwest for the first presentation. we'll certainly have some discussion after this presentation, and after the second one, we really want to dig in and answer some questions to make sure that we're moving in the right direction with the refinement of 40-40-20, so just be prepared for that.
Excuse me, sorry.
Thank you, Chair Spildy, for the opportunity to be here. I'm David Yaden, and this is John Tapania. I think you know all of us Tapania. I always do that. We appreciate the opportunity to be here, talk about 40-40-20. John and I first got engaged in trying to understand 40-40-20 about 3 years ago on behalf of the LearnWorks Oregon Learns project, sponsored by the Oregon Business Council. At that time, very little work had been done trying to understand what it actually means in terms of trying to put it into operation. Subsequent to that, I did some work within the State Board of Higher Education, trying to carry on the work of saying, what does this actually mean for the university system? What we present today is a very abbreviated version of some of the learning from both those efforts, but I think we're not here to represent ourselves as being representatives of either the Oregon State Board of Higher Education or LearnWorks. I think we all know that the statute itself on 40-40-20 is quite explicit. It says 40% of all Oregonians will have a bachelor's degree or better by 2025, and so on. That appears to be straightforward, but in fact, in discussions with legislative leaders and poking into the history and intent of the legislation, they refer to it more as aspirational rather than a hard goal. This is a fundamentally important point to understand up front. Secondly, there was very little legislative history in the adoption of 40-40-20. It refers to all adult Oregonians. Well, almost by consensus and without being stated, what it really means is all adult working age Oregonians. So just to give you some sense that this is not something that was constructed in a way that had a lot of either history or clear understanding behind it. The governor, I think very appropriately, has referred to it as a North Star, that is a direction rather than a destination. It may take us considerably longer than 2025 to get to that North Star, but if we're moving in the right direction, I think we would all feel quite happy about that. So what we hope to do today is at least tee up for you one way to think about how to productively, effectively, efficiently make use of 40-40-20. Just two fundamental points that I would emphasize is one, it's important for you to own 40-40-20 rather than it owning you in terms of dictating things that might not otherwise make sense. The other thing is we try to steer away in this presentation from giving you a hard and fast number about here's what the goal is numerically. The reason for that is there's some real policy implications for how we get to that number, but once a number gets out there, believe me, it gets sticky and it begins showing up in everything from capital requests to size of classrooms and everything else. So don't give it out a number before it's time. With that regard, in that regard, the first thing we can look at is actually the significance of how we specify what the goal is, and we actually do have a couple of choices for thinking about that. First of all, if you look at the so-called stock, the bathtub that's already filled up, we might think of that as the population of Oregon. And the law seems to specify that by 2025, we want everybody in every drop of water in that bathtub to have met the goal. The other way to think about it, and the one that we think may be more productive, is how are we doing on the flow that comes in each year? That is the number of Oregonians who pick a place, either start ninth grade and where they come out, or enter into the workforce each year. How are we doing with them? If we are reaching our goal with them, ultimately, over time, the population will reflect that. But if we start into thinking about being concentrated on the what's in the bathtub already, that'll lead us down some paths that you may want to think pretty seriously about. Now, just to give you some idea, if we were to look at all working age adults, we got a lot of work to do very quickly. We are roughly right now at 30% of the population with, there's 30% of the population with, I knew there was somebody up there who knew what this was about. 30% with bachelor's degrees, 20%, these are rough numbers, with 2-year degrees of some sort, 40% high school graduate, and 10% without a high school graduate. So we're not anywhere close to where we want to be, and the idea that somehow we can move ourselves with the whole working population, working age population there by 2025, potentially sets us up for nothing other than frustrating failure. If we focus on the population, there's a couple of policy implications. First of all, we're going to have a very strong emphasis upon adult education to reach the target. That's where most of the ground we could make up. There's nothing wrong with saying we want a strong adult education program, but should that drive what 40-40-20 impels us to do over the upcoming years? Secondly, trying to focus on what the population will look like in 2025 depends a lot on migration and the educational level of migrants, and frankly, that's a lot more variable than we might think. There's some question about whether any of the forecasting models we have right now is adequate to the task of saying, yes, there's the goal and here's the interim goals that we should achieve. I've already seen within the state system of higher education that this can lead very quickly to an emphasis upon capacity. Oh, we need to build X more classrooms in order to meet our 40-40-20 goal. And then the question of how do you set interim targets. Now, so a focus on the so-called cohort may make sense in a lot of respects, and we think it does, but it's not without its own complications. If we are actually to focus on the so-called pipeline, that is people transitioning into the workforce, we would still have a long ways to go. This chart shows you, if you look at the middle one, the 35 to 64-year-olds, kind of where they are right now, so that to move the whole dial on the overall average on the right-hand side, we're not going to get there, frankly, all that quickly by concentrating on the pipeline, but it will be moving in the right direction. And I think there's some important reasons for looking at the pipeline. One is, first of all, it puts emphasis upon the performance of the educational system. And it's just very clear that if we say we want every cohort that's coming out of our education system to be attaining these goals, that is a huge leap. Frankly, I think it's as good or better than anybody in the nation could aspire to at this time. I've given one example here. It's not the only way you could go about this, but just we have approximately 50,000 ninth graders each year. To me, that's a good time to focus because they're stopped moving around and they're really at that point where we need to be thinking about it. If we just said every year, if we're producing 20,000 4-year degrees and 20,000 2-year degrees and everybody else is graduating from high school, that's an enormous lift, but it's one way to think about a sort of focus on the so-called flow. Now, there are a lot of technical issues that you get engaged with if you start thinking about how do we track individual students. Again, one simplification is just to say, we're not even going to try to do that. We're just going to set our goal and say, we need 20,000 for Oregonians. We're not talking about out-of-state students and others here, but if every year those were our goals, we'd be definitely moving in the right direction. One thing that I, again, left out of some of these charts is the question about working age adults already and what we want to do for them. That doesn't mean we want to ignore them. It's just not something we've put in here. So I'm going to turn now to John, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the reality of where we are and some of the complications that come up.
Thank you, David. So, as David said a couple years ago, through the LearnWorks process, David came forward and he said, "Okay, we've had a lot of analysis around where this state stands on 40-40-20 relative to census estimates of educational attainment," and David went over some of those. We've seen them many times. 40-40-20 versus 30% with a BA, 18% with a associate's plus a credentials, etc. Those are relatively straightforward numbers to come forward with, and we have shown them many times. What David asked a couple of years ago, which we still haven't answered to my satisfaction, is the following. If we were to take a cohort of kids that were in 9th grade 8 or 9 years ago in Oregon high schools and followed them through time, how have they fared? And we are so close to being able to answer that question that it's very frustrating to me that we haven't yet, but we haven't. And so what I'm going to do now is just simply throw out a few charts here to get your thinking going, and then hopefully spark the energy to say, okay, it's time to answer the question that I just posed about this pipeline production. So when David came forward a couple years ago, Echo Northwest, with Memorandum of Understanding with the Oregon Department of Education, maintains a longitudinal database of kids that have moved through the K-12 system, and we have matched it against this National Student Clearinghouse, which follows kids not only into Oregon public universities and community colleges, but also privates and places elsewhere in the United States. And so I asked our very capable analysts, very sharp folks, I said, okay, use that information that you have as you can sort of see these populations moving to do a forecast. If you could take sort of a population of relatively recent high school folks and you sort of see how the behavior is in the past and forecast them out into the future. And let's see what rates of college attainment we get. Counting whether, if they go off to Stanford or Oberlin or whatever, we'll count them. If they're going to Willamette, we'll count them. And if they're going to the Oregon Publics, we'll count them as well. So what do we get? So I've got this guy who's been at Echo for like 29 years. He's the smartest guy in the office. He starts cranking away on this thing, and he comes back and he says, well, after about 4 or 5 years, I'm only getting sort of the high teens or low 20s in terms of the percent that get a 4-year degree. And I said, well, no, that's, Carl, you got to go back and do it again. And so he went back and he tried to work again and make some different slight assumptions, et cetera. He could only get these numbers into sort of the low 20s in terms of the share of kids coming out who ultimately would get, and I'm again now focused on 4-year degrees for the time being. And so I said, well, time out. Is that what we think this system is producing or not? And so then he went back and he said, well, John, he said, look at this. Let's just look at the educational attainment of Oregonians aged 25 and older, and segregate between native-born Oregonians and non-native-born Oregonians, which is kind of a rough approximation of what our system has produced, because native-born Oregonians well, they've probably been here most of the time, but some of these native-born Oregonians may have been high school graduates or moved here midstream. But his point was, say, look at the metro and the non-metro native-born Oregonians and the share who have four-year degrees. It's only about 25% for the metro population and only about 15% for the non-metro. He said, so maybe I, Carl, am not underestimating too much. Maybe that we have been benefiting from in-migration so much that it's masking relatively low productivity of the pipeline. And unfortunately, this is about as far as my story goes right now, because what we really need to do is we can use that National Student Clearinghouse data. I can count up the degrees. I elected not to show them here because I think that they are underestimated. There are too few in there for me to believe. But ultimately, we need to do some matching with both CCWD data and with Oregon University system data and figure out what's going on to get the right answer here to our level of comfort. Yes?
Why do you think the number would be better than that? That strikes me as probably true.
I think it is. What I'm getting out of the National Student Clearinghouse is even lower than that. And so somewhere between that answer, this answer, and bringing in some Oregon University system data and CCWD data, merging it with the K-12 data, I think we would get to something that would probably tell us that.
That's probably right.
I think it probably is. And so then you think back, you had a presentation last year at some point, it might have been into the year before, when NCHEMS came forward and built a very interesting model as well that was talking about sort of the need for degree production. That had migration assumptions sort of built in as well. And so at a minimum, just for technical understanding on performance, I think we need to isolate this and get a sense of, okay, what is this system producing on behalf of kids who are enrolled in Oregon high schools and have been part of this public system, and how are they faring going forward? A couple more charts. This one I threw in because David talked about population and the importance of migration. And this is educational attainment, four-year degree by birth year, and what you see is this divot in the early to mid 60s, and actually I think if I look at it closely enough, my birth year is the least well-educated birth year over this entire history. And then when I think about why that is, I think about what was going on in Oregon when I came of age. When I graduated from high school, we were in the depths of a double dip recession in the early 1980s. And so you think about sort of the dual effect of young talented people here with no opportunity who are going off and starting their careers elsewhere, and young talented people from elsewhere looking at Oregon saying there's no opportunity there. I'm not going to move to Oregon. This is sort of the economic imperative of, if you want educational attainment to be in good shape in this state, we need to keep the economy moving, and we need to be creating opportunity for folks to have productive lives here. Because when we go through tough periods like we did in the early 1980s, it creates a permanent feature in our demography that I think we're going to live with until my generation ages out.
John, you didn't have the draft either.
We didn't have the draft. You're right, and we didn't. It absolutely was. You had that as an incentive, but you also had the 1970s. Late 60s and 1970s in Oregon were, in a relative sense, economically robust relative to other states. And I think for these younger cohorts born in the 70s, you're looking at the period of the 90s with Intel moving up the coast and lots of stuff going on in Oregon. So what would we like to know that we don't know? And I'm just going to pick out, it could be any high school class. I'm going to say 2005 just to make it tangible. We need to know how many of those students enrolled in private institutions or left the state to pursue post-secondary education. We'd like to know how many ever enrolled in Oregon public institutions and how many terms they've used ultimately. And then out of all of that, how many earned degrees or credentials. And this is something that I think with a good solid matching exercise and some work, this could be answered within the month if we put our minds to it. Here's an example just to sort of illustrate the kind of data that we do have. And again, I didn't want to put degree production in this because I didn't trust the numbers. But this is what comes out of the National Student Clearinghouse in terms of the number of terms used, full-time equivalent terms used, both in 2-year and 4-year institutions anywhere in the United States for that class of 2005. So this is by quarter, so you can see they get very small in the summers. But the sort of high, the community colleges have an interesting sort of pattern with the red being very high right at the fall after the graduation, and then a very predictable pattern. You can sort of imagine continuing to draw that. You'd know when it's going to hit 0. And then the 4 years, a lot of folks sort of doing the traditional piece with elevated enrollment in those first 4 years, some of them going on for the 5th year, and then it's starting to drop off pretty dramatically. But what we need to get into these data, not only see all this term use, but see how many folks come out on the other end with a degree punched, a credential punched, et cetera.
How many graduates are you looking at this chart?
That's what I'm not showing, because we have that out of the National Student Clearinghouse, and I think for 4-year with these data, I was only coming up with somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 for the class of 2005, which I don't believe. And so what I would like to do is get the Oregon University system data in there to sort of say, okay, well, wait a minute, what is this system telling me relative to this National Student Clearinghouse? It may be that National Student Clearinghouse does a better job of tracking terms and enrollment than they do the degree at the end. But without sort of getting the two data sources in the same place, it's hard to answer that question.
Okay, in addition to the complications that come from just trying to get the math right, either in terms of setting goals or even understanding where we are, there are a few parting considerations that we'd like to leave with you. First of all, the significance of who gets these degrees, the distribution of degrees across subpopulations, particularly minority students, first-generation students, low-income students, and equally rural students. We know that it's pretty easy to, in chasing just sheer numbers, look to where's the easiest place to get those numbers. We're pretty sure that's not what the state of Oregon wants to do. Types of degrees. We clearly, at least in the upper, have education beyond high school, have an interest in STEM degrees. It's possible that somebody along the way will want to expand that in terms of what we're willing to pay a premium for in terms of getting the kinds of degrees that really are productive for the individual and for the state economy. The adult education, again, is an issue. Quality of degree, I didn't even put that on the list here, but increasing interest in terms of how do we know that the degrees we're producing are productive. At some point, that's going to get factored in. And one other thought. Postgraduate degrees and advanced degrees and graduate education. We really haven't factored those in here in terms of how do you count for them in terms of the overall degree and what kind of consideration they get. So a lot for you to have on your plate. Good luck.
Yes.
Thank you, both of you, for keeping us enlightened, continually keeping us enlightened. John, I'm going to take you back about 2 years ago. You appeared before the State Board of Education, and you said something like this, and this is not a quote, but you said, if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're not going to get to where we want to go. So, having looked at this data, the two of you, what kinds of course correction changes in what we've been putting out as policy do we need to have if we are going to get closer to where we want to go as opposed to where the lines on the graphs are indicating for us? What are you taking from this that's helpful to us?
Well, it's a big list of everything that you've ever considered on this board since its inception. But I would say the first thing that comes to mind is, with respect to post-secondary degree production, I think there's some real low-hanging, inexpensive fruit by exploiting what right now is just a lack of information on the part of students about the cost and their ability to participate in post-secondary education. The program that I will talk about until somebody institutes it in the state of Oregon is this trial that they had in North Carolina with H&R Block and free financial aid assistance, where they literally had folks they were coming into H&R Block to get their earned income tax credit or quick tax return. And the folks would look at and say, well, you've got a 17-year-old here. What if I just press a button and I'll fill out a financial aid form for you, a FAFSA form, which is a red type bureaucratic nightmare. And the college going rates and persistence rates for those that they randomly decided to provide that additional bit of assistance were higher than for the control group, and it costs nothing to do that. I think that's an example. We've got an Aspire program in this state that is, I think, well conceived and deployed. I don't think it is strategic as it could be. It's trying to do the exact same thing as H&R Block, in essence, putting math-savvy parents and volunteers in front of kids who are considering going to college. But strategically, what they don't do is they sort of, in many of the schools, it's sort of an all-comers. Anybody who shows up can get that kind of assistance. I think they need to very intentionally look across that school and drag some of the kids out and say, here, we're going to help you with this, and you ought to be thinking about these opportunities. I think from the all across the scale of low-income Oregonians in high school, there are kids that aren't going to school at all that should be going to community college. There are kids that are going to community college that should probably be aspiring to four-year degrees. There are kids that are four-year degrees that are going in Oregon that might be aspiring to the Ivy Leagues, etc. There's a misinformation all the way across that spectrum and an overall under-enrollment and underuse of the Pell Grant system. So that's certainly not... That's the easiest low-hanging fruit answer to change these numbers in a hurry.
We talked quite a bit about trajectory, and this is great, and it's kind of a summative look in a way. But I was just curious, I don't know if this is even a question to John or not, but we talked about plotting our trajectory and helping districts. We look at these achievement compact indicators along the way. 2025 is 100% graduation rate, for instance. Middle 40, we have the most work. Do we have trajectory numbers at this point to plot? Here's where we are in January 2014. We're a little bit rhetorical, but I guess where I'm at is we've talked a lot about trajectory to help with achievement compact plotting. And to me, as I look through this PowerPoint, I'm looking at summative data, but I would almost like formative trajectory. Does that make sense?
Yes. And
what you add to that question, we're now in our third year since the legislature said that.
Right.
It has moved it all in 3 years.
Right. We And we talked about the kindergartners entering the first kindergarten class last year, being the 2025 year. So are we looking at them as a cohort through the system? How many are going to hit the KRA? And are they on a trajectory we need to be?
Yeah, so a couple answers to that. One is, as you move through the very first passes of Achievement Compact Exchange with school districts, in particular, I'm thinking school districts, not as much at the post-secondary level, there was just a mix of answers that came back. Some of the answers made perfect sense in terms of goal setting. Some of them were absurdly low. Some of them were outside the realm of possibility high. And a trajectory forecast and working with those districts to say, okay, here's a path for you over the course of the next 5 years. This is where you could aspire to be. This might be a stretch, but it's within the realm of possibility. That could be a productive exercise for the school boards and teacher leaders, et cetera, to sit down and think through. Right.
You know, if we were to start looking at cohorts and monitoring classes like you did up here,
right,
and we had a range and a band you could fall within, I think there's your scorecard, Dick. Ultimately for OEIB, 40-40-20, is that band our districts within that on the
right. Now, I will say that, and there are probably some people who have thought a little bit more about this than I have before I make this statement. But one thing this state has to be careful about is that its compass is going to be spinning around a little bit over the course of the next couple of years. It already has started, and Betsy Hammond found it. We've got this issue of the Oaks and how many attempts kids are making on math and reading. And Oregon had a pretty unusual policy and continues to have a pretty unusual policy of multiple attempts on a summative assessment. Well, statistically speaking, the more attempts you make, and if you get to keep the highest one, you're going to bias upward your estimate of achievement just by how many times you attempt it. And we've looked at this across districts and different policies, et cetera. So as the policy is probably a good one to use the summative assessment for what it's intended for and reduce the number of attempts. It is making it look like you're backtracking on achievement as the number of attempts is declining. So you're getting unhelpful misinformation in front of the public and the Oregonian and everything else. Then you're going to switch to a completely different assessment that has a different. So, you know, in addition to psychometricians and all of that, a good PR person that could help explain all of this to people. It's even for somebody who consumes it a lot, it's sort of hard to figure out, are things getting better or worse? So I think the point is you're going to have to find some indicators that aren't spinning around like that, like graduation rates, post-secondary enrollment rates, chronic absenteeism, things of that nature to say, look, we're sort of changing the rules here a little bit with respect to how many times the kids have taken these tests, the tests that they take, et cetera. We understand there's going to be some variability going on, but here are some other indicators that are stable and reliable that are the same over time, like graduation rates.
I just wanted to add just two things. One, given the two big headwinds that we have working against us, one, changing the demography of the state, where we have students that are increasingly going to be require more effort to reach the same attainment. And secondly, the economy, which has such an effect in terms of higher ed enrollments. I mean, it's good news that the economy is improving, but higher ed enrollments at both community college and four-year going the other way. So I take the almost simple view that any positive number in terms of improvement is a good thing, and it's actually a pretty adequate number in a lot of ways.
One area where we can use support and help is really helping us articulate the importance of and the opportunity that exists with students of color. Across Oregon, 35% of our kids who are 0 to 18 are children of color or from immigrant families. And I'm pretty sure as we continue to talk about 40, 40, 20, it always feels a little bit like an afterthought. And, you know, today they're 1/3 of our students. We're only about 10 to 15 years with the rates of babies being born and born into communities of color from being majority minority statewide. And yet those are our students who are not achieving for a variety of reasons. And I think that there's wide support from the OEIB to really think differently about how we do things, but we need to articulate that in a way using numbers that really makes that case to the rest of the world, because I don't think folks understand it yet. And those students represent our best opportunity, but if we continue to do the same things we're doing now, that are getting these terrible outcomes of these populations, statistically we will never meet this goal. And I just feel like that needs to be front and center in every presentation. We probably need a little bit of your help really articulating that better.
Absolutely. I think if you went and you asked the typical Oregonian to guess what share of kids grew up in a household without an English-speaking parent, they wouldn't guess somewhere between 20 and 25%. The state has changed in its demography, and it's changed relatively quickly. And it's not the one that, if they grew up in this state, that they are familiar with when they went to high school.
I think the other interesting thing is a lot of people have a lot of misperceptions about poverty, but also when you look at African American, Latino, and Native students who are from higher income families, they're not achieving either. And so we like to make this an issue of poverty or not poverty, but in reality the data doesn't support that. It's really an issue of race, and we're very uncomfortable talking about that. And I just think that needs to be front and center in every data presentation that we take, so we can gain support.
I don't know that I agree with the research that you just stated. I'd love to look a little deeper into that. But what I wanted to bring forward, we talked a lot about trajectory and setting this trajectory to 40, 40, 20. But I don't know how you set a trajectory without having some planning, putting some strategies and tactics in place that you can actually achieve something. And that's been my real frustration with a lot of these conversations. It's, well, let's set a number. Let's tell the districts what that number should be. Well, if there aren't supports in place in order to get there, and if you don't have a plan, then I'm not sure how you do it. We've said 2025 is the date. Today, in Southern Oregon, there are 58 kindergarten students in the same classroom with one teacher. That teacher happens to be a first-year teacher. She also is working with 8 instructional assistants to help those 58 kindergarten students in their first-year teacher's classroom to be successful. And we're talking about 40, 40, 20 by 2025. We have not set those students up for success. We don't have a plan in place for those students to be successful in life. So how do we continue? I mean, I am all for finding a path and setting a plan in place where students can be successful. But as John, as you just stated, we've got Oaks, now we're going to Smarter Balance. Educators aren't trained on Smarter Balance yet. We're going to go ahead and implement it. It's coming. We're told we have to. Students aren't prepared for it. We know the data is coming out of other states that have already implemented. Students aren't successful, so we're setting them up for failure. We continue to just say, we have to go fast, because those students in kindergarten last year were the class of 2025. My great nephew is in that class. I couldn't be more dedicated to making sure that Carter has a great education, as well as every other student. But until we create a path by some real planning, by some discussions with parents, students, and educators, and then the commitment from the adults in this state to really do something different, then we don't get there. So, I appreciate the data. I appreciate digging into it. I hope that we continue to find the actual strategies and tactics and spend some more time working with those students about how we get there.
This is Kay speaking. Johanna, I agree with what you just said, but my question, and it really is rhetorical because I don't know that you have the answer, is how do we develop that path, and whose responsibility is it to do that?
I think it's our responsibility, along with every district across the state. We put compacts in place. we said it was a two-way handshake in which we would ask them to tell us how they were going to get to 40-40-20, what strategies and tactics would they use. We also said, I believe, that should be used in their budgeting process, so they actually budgeted for success in strategies and tactics. That I haven't seen in place yet. I think it's our responsibility to go back and look at that information and then dig in those really hard conversations with them about what is it they need to be successful and what are we going to do as the OEIB, we're supposed to be overseeing P through 20, what are we willing to do to get out in the public through the forums or whatever it is to convince them we've got to change the way that we're doing things in public education. And that doesn't mean that we slap teachers around and students around for not being successful. It is about engaging them in, we've got to be able to invest in and focus on those things that matter, and standardized tests are not the answer. I will tell you there's not an educator in the state who would stand up and say that right now we're doing the right thing by the students that they work with every day. We put too much emphasis on that. We need to put more emphasis on actual assessments that guide instruction. I look forward to us continuing to work with Linda Darling-Hammond about creating those. I look forward to the teachers and the administrators in the state. The TEL survey, I think, is huge for us to really hear from them about what the realities are. So that would be, we have a lot of work to do ourselves to really dig in and have those deep conversations with parents, students, and educators.
Thanks, Dick.
My own thinking, this is Kay again, my own thinking about that is that it has to be more of a joint process, because I don't think that OEIB alone or even the Department of Education can craft a plan that people are going to support and invest in unless it's a joint collaborative effort. And maybe there needs to be some conversation in each district about how together we can develop a plan that moves that needle in the direction of 2020-40. Because just having it as a goal, we won't get there.
What makes me nervous is this one-size-fits-all in the compacts. If you talk about a compact in Sherwood School District that reflects upon 6% of their students are in poverty, are we going to expect the same expectation of those students that are in Port Oxford at 55%, which is one of the worst ones in the whole United States, living in poverty, only 55%? So we have this whole array of the geographic area of Oregon and the economics of it. I think sometimes the elephant in the room is we're going to have to put people back to work and create the funds to be able to fund what Anna's talking about. So, this is, Madam Chair, you're the one that's responsible for this. Let's get this thing done.
Sure. I have a question, though. I want to make sure I understand the distinction you're making between working age adults and the pipeline. And are you suggesting and recommending a focus?
My personal view is that a focus on the pipeline and on the annual cohorts is much more appropriate as an attainable and yet very ambitious goal that focuses our attention mostly on the performance of the education system and of the overall pipeline. That is very clearly, four-year schools are not going to succeed ultimately unless both community colleges and high schools are able to perform better. The focus on the population will result in a much more diffuse focus, in my estimation, around adult education and worrying about the attainment of those annual numbers in among the very broad population. In other words, it will dilute some of the focus I think you need on the performance of the education system, and particularly the true effective functioning of that pipeline. So that's my take.
I guess I would take a little bit of issue with that as a community college professional, because I think, number one, it disaggregates our mission and really ignores our mission, which as non-selective institutions, we're not willing to marginalize a certain population to no education just because they happen to be 4 to 5 or unemployed. So I think I recognize the issue of diffusing the effort, but I think we've got to think carefully about who's in and who's out, and are we willing to leave a number of people
on the sidelines while we focus on the people coming new into the system.
Yeah, were you to decide that 40-40-20 is a pipeline goal, I think a separate goal and an explicit conversation about adult education workforce development for 25 years and older, it has to take place, because it's just sitting in a vacuum right now until.
And I mean, I think the workforce conversation needs to take place here as well as in the tech, because again, it's from that point of view of, are we going to disaggregate community college mission and have us already, we are so central to K-12, to universities, to employers, to our communities. We can't be, I mean, I don't know if you saw the movie The Incredibles, where the person was stretched. I mean, that, I think, is how many of us are feeling. And I think we're so critical to, particularly that middle 40, that we've got to really think about the mission. And we've got to be careful that also with the focus on certificates and degrees, not that I don't agree we need to do a heavy lift there, but we're so much more than that, and our students are so much more than that, that if we just focus on degrees and certificates, I can get there really easily by being a selected institution.
Yeah.
And that's not something I think any community college board or president is willing to do. So I think there needs to be much more attention to how we focus on the whole mission of community colleges and make sure that the state isn't interested in just a piece of it, because it's a short, if 40-40-20 is the pipeline goal, it's a short step for me from there to that's all the state wants to fund. And I think that would be bad for communities and bad for community colleges and the mission and service. So I think that's a discussion that we ought to engage in as a board. Other questions for John and David? Seeing none, thank you very much for the information. It was a wonderful segue into our next conversation. Looks like, Ben, you're on your own.
I am, yeah. Tim is not available today.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So while Seth is bringing up the presentation, I'll draw your attention to the document that was mailed or emailed to you and is in your packets today that accompanies this. The purpose that Tim and I, and now the HEC, which has adopted this document as draft recommendations to you, the purpose here was to try to resolve some of the questions that or present for your consideration potential resolution to some of the thorny questions, including definitional and methodological questions relative to 40-40-20 that John and David have raised. So this follows nicely on their presentation. The work here reflects, as I said, the HEC's consideration and now adopting for your consideration of support from Agnes Balassa, who's the governor's workforce policy advisor sitting behind me to my left. Gerald Hamilton and CCWD weighed in. And we were particularly concerned to try to get at this issue of, is 40-40-20 about the adult population? Is it about the pipeline? As well as the question of what is the middle 40? We've had, we allude to it without a very clear understanding of it. Before I jump in here, I think it's worth pausing and saying, at least asking maybe the elephant in the room question, is this all just an academic exercise? And I think it's not, and I'll tell you why. As the Executive Director for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, this feels not at all to be an academic exercise, but in fact very important. The HEC will, in the exercise of its responsibilities this year and next, be helping to develop for the governor and the legislature and your consideration a recommended budget for higher education. And it will likewise be deciding how to deploy whatever resources the legislature makes available for community colleges and public universities and financial aid. And as it does so, it intends to be guided by our understanding, our collective understanding of 40-40-20. And so, for example, whether or not this definition includes and how it includes the adult population versus the pipeline matters a lot to how we choose to develop a budget recommendation and make funding allocation decisions. So it feels at times, I think, like it could be merely academic, but certainly stepping into this role, it has felt, in fact, very important. It's why generated this for your consideration. So at the outset, just a sort of reminder on purpose and vision, and some of this covers ground that John and David mentioned already. We understand it to be a North Star, an aspirational goal, not a destination, against which generally to gauge Oregon's educational progress. Part of the purpose here clearly is the rough measuring stick, not fine-hewn, laser-guided tool, but a rough measuring stick for Oregon's educational progress. It's also fundamentally a statement of belief about the capacity of each and every student in Oregon and the imperative for the system to change to support their ability. Reminder just of the legal definition, which again John and David alluded to. You'll note here the language around all adult Oregonians by 2025. So this is as it appears in law, and of course we've tended to understand, as they suggested, that all adult Oregonians probably meant working age Oregonians, and then it raises other questions that we'll get into. But before the methodological or definitional issues, why 40-40? I think it's worth spending a moment on why those numbers were selected by the legislature and the governor when this was adopted in 2011. And as they noted, there isn't substantial legislative history on this, but I think there is general agreement about these 4 reasons. The first consideration that went into these high goals, the 40 and 40 goals for post-secondary educational attainment. The first reason had to do with economic demand, the workforce of the future, the understanding that we are an economy that is transitioning away from jobs that required only a high school diploma, or not only even that, to an economy that increasingly demands higher levels of education attainment. And those projections are available from the Oregon Department of Education. They tell us, based on surveys of employers and understandings of demographic changes, who's retiring, for example, where the likely jobs will be and what the education levels associated with those will be. The second note here is that the goals were set also on the basis, and it's sort of a balance of all these things, basis of a belief about education's role to help drive the economy, not merely to respond to economic demand, but to help drive a more prosperous economy for Oregon. The fact is, the first consideration here would not lead to 40-40 as our upper goals, because if you ask employers today, you will not find that they are hiring or planning to hire 80%, or that 80% of the positions that they would hire for requires a post-secondary credential or degree. But the bet here that the state has made is that by better educating Oregonians, we will help produce an economic transformation that will lift up all Oregonians, and that education, in fact, is the most important driver that we have to create that sort of transformation for our economy. The third has to do with the intrinsic and indirect benefits of education, not those that are directly related to income and job security, but the intrinsic good of education, and then indirect benefits referring to all of the other ways in which society benefits through lower crime rates, better health, et cetera, from a better educated population. And finally, the goal, I think, can be understood in the context of the experience of other states and countries. While none have matched, to my knowledge, at least states have matched quite these levels of education attainment across the board. There are states where more than 40% of the population earns a 4-year degree or above, and states where certainly closer to 40%. I'm not sure 40% has been attained around that middle 40, but somewhere not far off it. So we think there's a sort of reasonableness test here that we can use the experience of other states to divine. So now turning, I think, to the real crux of it, the definitional questions. The first note here, and it sort of barely came up in John and David's presentation, but it has been expressed by the governor, and I think this board through its equity lens and elsewhere, that while the legislative definition, the statutory definition doesn't say it, we do. And that the statement is that 40-40-20 should be understood as applying equally to all demographics, all populations in Oregon, without subpopulations significantly over or underrepresented at every level. And this really is the equity test. There's undoubtedly a better way of expressing it, and I would encourage the board's feedback on that point, but it seemed important to state it here. Turning to the adults versus the pipeline, who's the denominator, I suppose, for the goal here. The proposal that this document makes is that as a pipeline goal, this 40-40-20 should be understood as applying to the expected high school class of 2025 and, of course, the subsequent high school graduating classes of 2025, with a expectation that 80% of them, within a reasonable period of time, I think it might say sort of 5 or 6 years in the document, have achieved the post-secondary credential or degree at the 40 and 40 levels. This document also proposes that we understand 40-40-20 also as a goal for the adult population that would apply to working age adults in 2025 and beyond. But it draws a distinction between the two, and it says that that latter goal, focused on the working age adult population, should be continually refined based on actual labor market needs and the value of certificates, and may not be 40-40. That when we're talking about the adult population, we're going to focus in particular on that first rationale for 40-40-20, the value of certificates and degrees in contributing to one's expected earnings or job opportunities. And that may result, as we think about what our goals are for the adult population, that may result in goals that are not precisely 40-40-20, and they're ones that are going to change over time as the workforce needs change over time as well. So it's a distinction that we're proposing between the two, but we are certainly suggesting that we should understand our educational attainment goals and our investment approaches in terms of both supporting working age adults as well as developing a pipeline to meet 40-40-20. In terms of the middle 40, we've suggested here that the OEIB and the state should take generally a very broad conception of what credentials count, strongly informed by what employers value. Certainly, I think everyone understands that the middle 40 is meant to include 2-year associate's degrees, and we've suggested in the document and on this slide some of the other certificates or credentials that, generally speaking, seem to have economic value, seem to have intrinsic value, and as a result should be included in that middle 40. Clearly, there's a lot of work still to do to better articulate which of these certificates, which of these experiences ought to be included in the middle 40. I would note that not all of these are ones that are delivered primarily or even at all by a traditional education institution. That we're not merely talking about those degrees, certificates that are awarded by colleges, universities, or even private trade schools. That some of these may be workplace-related experiences, some of them may be online learning experiences, or employer-delivered or third-party delivered trainings that could result in a credential or certificate of value. In terms of our recommendations, we suggest that the OEIB should provide guidance that clarifies 40-40-20, especially around its relationship to the adult population and what constitutes the middle 40. We recommend that the OEIB should instruct the HEC to develop recommendations for, if it accepts this notion that the adult population matters in 40-40-20, that it should instruct the HEC to develop recommendations for what, generally speaking, those adult population goals should be. If they're not 40-40-20 or 40-40, what should we be aiming towards relative to adult population and labor market demands? And finally, that staff should attempt to develop a compendium of middle 40 credentials, including whether or not attainment data is available. One of the challenges, of course, is as we broaden the notion of the middle 40, it becomes increasingly difficult to know what the status of Oregonians is relative to those credentials. So we're encouraging you to recommend work in that regard. Our thought was that by presenting this to you and the public today, there would be time for, of course, whatever discussion the chair wishes to have now, and then further development and feedback for potential subsequent draft to you next month.
Okay, thanks, Ben. As mentioned, we're not asking you to take action on this today, but we would like to have some discussion about what we would need to have action in the future. So I just ask what questions come to mind with respect to the proposal and what questions might need to be answered prior to the official recommendation. So David and Angela.
Yeah, Ben, a few points. I think when this was discussed at the HEC, they saw the value in including both the pipeline and adults. And I think maybe in the context of what we've seen today, I would probably say, the long-term goals are the class of 2025, but we also have an immediate obligation to the adult population in the state. And I think a lot of those in post-secondary education realize that in workforce training. I think that's what we have to remember when we're talking about the middle 40 in particular. And it was also in a report we saw earlier today in the subcommittee on best practices. I forget the name of the committee, the cross-sector college career readiness committee. It has all those words in it somewhere. I don't know if that's the right order. They were talking about a definition of college and career readiness. And, in further discussion during the meeting, it came out, when they were talking about college career readiness, they weren't just talking about recent high school graduates, they were talking about for the adult population too, what that meant. I think when we do talk about career readiness, and I would also say college readiness in a basic level of education that people should have in the state, that should be applying to all adults in the state. It shouldn't be something we're writing off anybody who's older than 25 in the state. And I hope the OEIB sees that. I do have this, something I did say to the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. I think it's important. I'm kind of worried about the language that says for the adult population, those goals will be based on actual labor market needs. I think it really does have to be informed by what's out there in the labor market and the demands of the economy. I think it's a certain part of that self-selecting on the basis of the adult population already. But I don't want to see sometimes those statistics get very hyper-focused on just specialized work skills. And I'd like to remind everybody here, college career ready also means liberal arts, civic responsibilities, cultural competency, things we look for in a post-secondary education, analysis, higher reasoning, logic. And I wouldn't want to see, when we're talking about labor market demands, that overlooked for just some a hyper focus on specialized job skills. And I hope we can reword that and make that clear, because I think actually when you talk to many employers, they talk about those needs too. And going back to, I remember a focus group I saw of students in post-secondary education saying how they definitely wanted to learn career skills and something to go into the job market. These were younger students in post-secondary. But they also realized the need for broader base skills, that what they were learning wasn't particularly something they could count on for the next 40 years of their career. Like I think the traditional stereotype is of when you got your degree or your training or your skills that lasted for life, they realized they had to be flexible enough in today's economy and job market. So I'd just like to make sure that is in there, although, when we're talking about the economy and those demands. My other point is, I think it's very good, and the HEC agreed with it, that we're going for broader goals for the middle 40 than just an AA or a 2-year certificate. And I think that's very important too, that there are a lot of rigorous courses out there that may not be reflected in what you see as traditional transfer degree types of courses. I think a lot of the apprenticeships nowadays, the registered ones, have a good deal of classroom time and very high level on the job skills that are done with them. And I also think the career pathways, having been involved with that at my community college, is a very good entry point for a lot of students that may not be ready at this point in their life for a 2-year, 4-year course in academics, but it really does get them into a job with training. And also the idea behind that course is they will return to education further on as they move up in their career. So I think it's good we're looking at a broader definition of the middle 40 here in order to really respond to, we talk a lot about what the students need and the students want, and we're talking about adults here, and that really does reflect what they see as relevant and important in their life. It's going to really get them ahead.
Just a couple comments and a question. I like the focus on not just the current labor market needs, because I think those are likely to result in levels of attainment that are lower than we would want, or that would be prepared students and Oregonians for the future workforce. I also particularly like the focus, the sort of the more strategic focus on underserved racial and ethnic groups and rural Oregonians as part of, when you look at the 40, are they representative of the 40? The one thing I guess I would say is just it's useful as we're looking at documents and continuing to have a discussion that we, whatever the graphic representation of the 40-40-20 is, that we somehow that we represent it. So we just keep it top of mind. So as hopefully as we move towards the 40-40-20 goal, but we can see also progress among the subgroups. And then the final point related to the expanded definition of what that middle 40 is, and I think that's a great idea. My question would be, assuming their recommendation is made to go in that direction, how long will it take the hack to sort of create this sort of portfolio of potential certificates
I'm looking at Agnes and Gerald and chuckling because I started to ask, little did I know, I started to ask the people, the experts, what existed in terms of certificates that appear to have some value and might be part of the middle 40. And I got back thousands, literally. I mean, thousands of these things exist. And so then the question is, well, I guess question one is, does the state of Oregon intend to sort of keep a registry of those that it deems worthy and included in the middle 40? So that's question one. And then question two is if so, how would we go about determining that? I think that what the HEC can do is advise you on, generally speaking, more illustrative examples of what counts. I think that the HEC will not soon be in a position to develop that hard and fast yes, no, yes, we've evaluated, we've looked at labor market demand, we've looked at the quality of the program associated with it, we've looked at the assessment, and we are therefore putting a state stamp of approval on what is, many of them, a sort of private badge or certificate. But I think that the HEC can, in relatively short order, flesh out a list of illustrative examples and then begin the work of attempting to analyze how many Oregonians today are acquiring these and how, and then what investment strategies we might, or other strategies we might bring forward in order to promote the attainment of them.
So the question is, how long would it take to do that? Examples. And then second, if you look at the whole exhaustive list of those that might fit into the classification of this 1,000, is it possible to take sort of like the top 25 or something that's much more manageable, so that with a set much lower number you capture the vast majority of them? Is a question I remember. I mean, I have an associate's degree with the top 2-year piece, and then.
Okay, with your permission, I'll invite Agnes to.
50%, the extra 800 of them may not be worth it, but it may be worth it to focus on the top 25 and then
So I'm Agnes Veloso, the Governor's Policy Advisor for Workforce, and while not a complete expert on certifications, can offer a couple of thoughts on this. One piece of the puzzle is that you do have a number of nationally recognized, portable, industry-recognized credentials with fairly high levels of rigor that are fairly well defined. Again, there could be thousands of those as you go through the list, but what becomes clear as you look at those is that there are certain quality criteria that you would consider in approving those. Typically, a third-party evaluation, or a certified institution that creates the exit testing for the credential, if you will, whether that is a community college that has gone through accreditation, whether that is an industry association that has gone through a formalized process, but where there is a rigorous test that is recognized by the end recipients as being part of the answer. And so those are some of the ways that you can start to use a set of criteria to fine-tune what your list looks like. The bigger challenge will be to be able to actually capture those out in the marketplace, as Gerald's staff has way more information about that piece than I do.
So in direct response, Julia, I'm going to create a challenge for myself, working especially with Gerald and Agnes and others, to by next month have a top 20 list that we think are generally meet these criteria of industry recognized, nationally recognized, valuable, in addition, of course, to associate's degrees that our colleges offer.
And there's licensures too.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to add, there is a national group looking at the way to monitor these third-party certificates, and we are involved, at least initially, in one call, at the beginning call in that process. So I think we are not the only state that really is trying to figure out how to process your question and how to track that. As Dr. Spilly knows, I mean, this is getting to the mission of the community colleges, I think, but there are some clearly examples like Agnes has talked about, and I would offer the ASC certification for auto mechanics. Very rigorous third-party evaluation, certified welding, and very rigorous, certification for welding, and so there are those out there that make that standard that are very easily recognized.
Thanks, John. Thank you. You talked about the bet that we're making on the middle 40, and I know we've had the employment division here a couple times, and I hear Julie talk about, we want to build something that's better, and I agree, we want to build something that's better, but we also want to make sure that there are jobs for those people that are now probably going to be in debt substantially in order to retain those certificates. So I would just ask, as the HEC does their work, that they would bring back data to this board to show that, yes, there is a path, that we're working with the business community to show that there will be jobs for those individuals, so that so they can rest at ease and know that if you persist and go through and get this degree, it's going to pay off for you in the long run. And I think David just said he'd share some information on the other states and where they are as far as that moving forward.
I think it's a really good point. It's one thing for policymakers to say, to vote on this bill 40-40-20 and sort of make that bet, right? Take it on faith that build it and they will come. I think it's quite another thing to put a student in a position of taking it on faith, incurring the debt without prospect of, or high prospect of, or confidence of a job on the other end. And the HEC is deeply concerned about that, and I think we can bring back our best thinking around it.
We're a little over time, but I want to give a little more time to this, because this is really putting the meat on the bones of 40-40-20, which is kind of the background of our work. So I want to make sure that every board member has had an opportunity to weigh in and choose.
I would just say I'm really appreciative of how specific it is. It's a really great next step.
Let me just make a comment. I think the tension that we have is what we want to do somewhat longer term on the education piece, but we also have this basket full of unemployed right today. Mm-hmm. And so is there some education, is it coming to our privy here to find out what would what education would help these people get to work yesterday, and then have this longer term piece too. So I think there's that tension on these bookends that, and of course, generally speaking, the economy and all that, but I mean, still the fundamental fact, particularly like Southern Oregon, if we want the poverty issue, it's pretty significant, and it does bleed into, obviously, to the education process too. So, you know, there's this tension between the goals that we have for the education, but we also have people that aren't at work today, and can education help those people get to work? So, you know, that's something we need to do.
I think you have a potential partner there, though, in the other state board that focuses on these issues, which is the Oregon Workforce Investment Board, because their mission is primarily about helping the unemployed and underemployed get back to work. And it seems like there's an alignment between the work at this table about trying to figure out how educational attainment is part of our mechanism for creating a more highly skilled populace, but also a way of creating a better economy. There's also this more short-term transactional piece that board focuses on, which is how do we get the people who are unemployed today more effectively back into jobs. And so as the governor and I have been talking about this, one of the things we'd be interested in talking about is how some of the work of these two boards comes together in a more purposeful way so that we can better support each other in these efforts and make sure that we're completely aligned in both sets of strategies. So more to come on that discussion.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to get into the question that the governor, and I think we've been posing this 40-40-20 for what? It's really just a proxy, right, for prosperity and every person having an opportunity. And I think this conversation of pipeline versus working adult, rather than posed as a versus, should be a both and.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole issue of the job creation piece, which we've got to have someplace for these students to go.
And then we're putting our toe into politics here. There are some restrictions on what people are not being hired. And we should address the fact too that also that it's the meetings that I go to in Portland, we're not talking about the 57 or 60% of the employers who hire 100 or less. And see, I mean, it's great to have the Nikes and the Intels, which is great for the state, and that's super, but there's still a lot of people my size who hire this basket that's unemployed, and there might be some reasons that we're not. So that's the politics that are involved.
Ron.
Well, I just follow on Dick's comment. I mean, we hire a lot of people who don't necessarily need degrees. And I sit on the executive board of the National Association of Manufacturers and compare notes with a lot of companies. On average, we have to hire 3 for every 1 we keep. And this is lack of education, it's lack of work ethic, it's failing drug tests, and a whole bunch of things that make people not good employees that do not have to do with what degree they have. And we routinely hired 2,400 people last year to keep 800. And so if we really want to talk about some of those people, there certainly is a part of the population for whom more education will help them advance their career. There's a significant part of our unemployed who need more basic skills, like you show up to work on time and you come back the next day, and you don't use drugs before you leave work.
You know, we're becoming the best practice committee this morning. We looked at the work with the career for really defined definition of career readiness, and those skills that you're talking about were really called out quite well. So I think next month you're going to like what you see in the definition that's going to be coming as a recommendation. It really hits on those areas you're talking about.
I think Dave Yaden talks about this. We can talk about what college degrees are, more valuable than others if you want. But in that 20% that are high school, we need to talk about those people being prepared for jobs too. And jobs need more than a high school degree. They need these kinds of basic work skills and that type of thing. So.
Any other questions or comments we've got for Ben? We'll see you again. Thank you, Ben. Thanks, Agnes.
I'll be right
Thank
here.
We're going to take a 10-minute break. Okay. Nancy, go ahead and introduce
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody, after Ben moved in his new role, has been asking me, so who's taking Ben's place? And so that person is here today. She's day 2 on the job. And I just want to introduce her. Maybe next time you can come up, but this is Danny Ledenzma. Yeah. And she is new, and she will be the education policy person. And I think one thing that's really exciting about it is that we're going to work much closer than we have before in terms of the education policy person and the OEIB. So it's great to have you here, and maybe next time to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Nancy. So moving on, we have Peter to give us a report on the longitudinal database. And if the board is ready, we are actually going to ask for approval for this, if you're comfortable doing that when the time comes. So turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Chair Spildy, members of the OEIB board. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Since I haven't spoken to the whole board before, I do want to give just a little bit of background so you understand where I'm coming from. My formal training when I was undergrad was in science. I think one thing that's interesting in this whole discussion about credentialing and credits and achievements that you have is I taught myself to be a computer programmer when I was an undergraduate and also as a high school student. And throughout my career, that aptitude has enabled me to get all kinds of jobs, including the one I hold right now, working at the OEIB, and yet I hold no certificate and no official recommendation or recognition that I'm a skilled computer programmer. So it's interesting how some particular skills that are not even credentialed can be a gateway to all kinds of different things. After being trained as a biologist, I ended up being a teacher. And I've taught every age group from kindergarten, actually pre-K, all the way through university. I've taught the U of O as well as some other universities. I've mainly taught science and computer science, but I've also been a reading teacher. And a number of years ago, I got an administrative license and became a principal. And I've been a middle and high school principal in Eugene for 12 years. Along the way, I, in Albany, worked as a technology coordinator before I was a school administrator. And then just last year in the Eugene School District, our director of technology retired. And I took on that role in Eugene, hoping to bring together technical know-how with educational experience to move the dial in Eugene in a variety of respects. This September, about a week into September, I was contacted by Nancy and the OEIB to work on loan for this year to pick up the work of the business case, or to pick up the work of advocating to the legislature this February for the creation of something that in statute OEIB is required to do, which is to build a longitudinal database that's focused on student-level data, and the purpose of it mainly is to look at outcomes and investments made statewide, and specifically key investments that come through this group as well as others. And so since I've been here in September, been a lot of work going on, and I know it might be a little bit unusual to be asking for some approval at today's meeting, but our timeline's pretty tight, and the next time I'll be speaking in front of a group about this, it'll be to the legislature in February, and I would like to be able to take the input from this group and make that public when I speak in front of the legislature. So I've got a short presentation. There's a lot of information here. I'm going to opt to go at a pretty high level and pretty quickly, and then leave sufficient time at the end for questions. But I appreciate questions, and if I hear crickets when it's time for the questions, I actually have some questions up there that I think you might want to ask maybe, and I'll just start answering them, and hopefully that'll generate more thought. So the official title to this project is the Statewide Longitudinal Database System for P through 20. Really, when we say P through 20W, it's common it's a term of art to say P through 20 or P through 20W. Really, when we define that group and define about whom the data that we're going to collect is from, or from what group it's from, is really students, Oregonians from birth to college and career. And that's a new kind of concept, and we're still using the P20W because it's more common. But P doesn't just mean preschool, it really means early experiences for students from the time they're born. And the W relates to workforce, and it's very relevant to all of the discussions that we just had about 40-40-20. And as a matter of fact, I couldn't imagine teeing this topic up better for this committee than following the two presentations that we just followed. John Taponia was kind in not mentioning the fact that one of the reasons that he's unable to bring data that he'd like to bring to you all about 40-40-20 is because the data that we currently collect and match up in terms of longitudinal records are insufficient to give to a group like Echo Northwest or even to internal policy folks to give answers to what's happening to that 9th grade group. We don't have the longitudinal records to do something about the clearinghouse data and really examining it. So it's great the way the agenda worked out that I could follow those two groups. The overview is here. I think you've got the PowerPoint. I'm not going to go over each item on here, but there's the overview. First thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is what the heck do we mean by longitudinal data? And longitudinal data is data over time, but depending on where you sit, that data looks really different. If you are a student, longitudinal data has to do with, well, what have I achieved? And then what are my goals and my next steps? And how does that affect my pathway? So if I'm a student, I'm interested in longitudinal data not only about me, but also about Oregon and jobs that are out there and how much schools cost, because my view of longitudinal data is about me. If you're a school or an agency, longitudinal data has to do with, well, how do we do? How do we do in the Achievement Compact? How do we do with respect to our goals? And then prospectively, where are we going? How are we going to change? And for a group like this and for other policymakers, there's lots of things here that could fit under this, but in particular, I called out what's our return investment with respect to 40-40-20? What's our return investment in terms of achievement compacts? And then prospectively, well, what new investments should we make? And what policies should we consider or change? I think when the statute was written in Senate Bill 909 with respect to a longitudinal database, people had all of these ideas in mind when this was passed. And I was not present when this particular element of the legislation was passed, but I have had the opportunity to interview all kinds of people who were present, either in the legislature, state agencies, or other partners. And in my interviews, I've heard comments about all these kinds of longitudinal data and the import of all of them. And to some degree, this presentation today and the recommendation from our project team touches significantly on all three. Maybe most the first and the third, but really it has an impact on all three of these levels. So in arriving in Salem and beginning to work, my background was and is K-12. One of the things that the Eugene district does is we maintain a regional data warehouse that aggregates data from 7 school districts. And a similar function is provided by ESDs around the state that allow most of the K-12 institutions and districts out there to report to an intermediary agency who aggregates data and provides some value added back to the districts. So I run a regional achievement, a regional database as part of Eugene School District. We also have implemented a new student information system this year, as well as half the students in our state. Probably a lot of you have heard of Synergy. And again, as I mentioned before, I've been a teacher and a principal. So most of my personal understanding about this project, K-12, is pretty solid. But in coming to the state level, there's all kinds of other things that I needed to tease out and figure out. First, with respect to the problems that are experienced by OEIB and other state agencies, and also what the opportunities are. And these 3 bulleted problems are the result of a zillion interviews and reading of documents and considering of things, not just in Oregon, but statewide. The first problem is we do not have an OEIB data system. It says in statute that we will. It says in statute that we'll have it by 2012, and we'll have it to do bullet number 1, and we don't. So that's a problem, any way you slice it. The second thing is that as you look across the system P through 20, we have siloed data systems. And I actually debated whether I should use the word siloed because it's such a pejorative term. It must be bad if it's in a silo. But in fact, as I'm going to describe in a couple of minutes, there's some advantage to siloing data in terms of security. Philosophically, I feel, and I think a lot of other folks in education feel, because of the confidential nature of the student record, that in general, unless a large agency at the state level needs student level data, they shouldn't have it. The student level data should exist close to the student and only broadly shared or shared up the pipeline when necessary. It's kind of like the way we look at the federal government and laws. Nevertheless, the siloed data system that we have in Bullet 2 is problematic because we don't share. We don't have similar nomenclature, definitions, policies, and maybe the biggest thing is we don't have a governance structure that tells us or allows us to go to have some recourse when sharing isn't happening and where it's critical. And that's something I'll talk about in some detail at the end of this, and it's wrapped up into the work of the OEIB, I believe, is providing some of that leadership around governance. Third problem, and again, this is the student and family perspective, but I hear this a lot in the work that I do in Eugene and then in the interviews I've done, is that students and families don't have access to their record of achievements. Right now, what we have at the K-12 level is something called a cumulative record. In most schools, a cumulative record is a folder. It's a manila folder that has a bunch of stuff stuffed into it. Depending on the kid and the school and the experience, that manila folder might be little or it might be big. Lots of times a big folder means that there's a lot of stuff in there, and that could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Most families and students never see their cumulative folder. It's pretty unusual for a family to come in and ask for a copy of it, although we do that. And I'll bring this up a couple of different times and ways, but there's a real equity difference, or there's an observation I've made as a public school person with regard to the CUME file. Those of privilege ask for the CUME file. They have the privilege to have that part of the day off, or know that they can go into school, or feel comfortable at school asking for it. And there's all kinds of folks in the schools where I've worked who would never even think of coming into the school, wouldn't feel comfortable asking for the CUME file, and so they don't. So this access to data, first off, it's the method that we use is archaic, it's not electronic. What's in it is idiosyncratic to what schools or organizations the kids are in, and few people access it. And then when you get to post-secondary, what you're talking about in terms of a record of achievement is generally a transcript, which is generally electronically available for folks and easy to get to, but it may or may not be a very comprehensive view of what the student has actually achieved. So those are three problems. When you look at opportunities, these four opportunities are directly related to the problems. The first two to the first problem and the second two to the second and third problem, respectively. The opportunity, one opportunity is that policymakers, were we to overcome the problem that we just looked at, policymakers could use Oregon longitudinal data to research, look at best practices, outcomes and investments, and also make better policy recommendations. That's a benefit that could accrue to this group, the HEC, Early Learning Council, all kinds of groups. And ideally, if we build this right, and I'll talk about this in more detail towards the end, but if we build this right so that the data that we're looking at is de-identified and therefore not as private, confidential as the stuff we have in schools, this is the kind of data that a group like Echo Northwest could use in a very powerful way. As part of my interview process, I interviewed some of our research partners in the state, and they spend approximately 20% of the research budget when we ask a group like Echo Northwest or Education Northwest to provide some longitudinal analysis of data P through 20 or 9 through 20 or whatever. They spend about 20% of that money that we've given to them to contract out just doing matching of records. So having that kind of matched database could be advantageous in that respect as well. The second opportunity revolves around the achievement compacts. And this is something that in OEIB, in our policy group, we talk about every single week, is the achievement compact process. And I know as a member of Eugene School District, we took the achievement compact process seriously and do feel very confident that the measures within the achievement compact process are important and relevant and project forward to greater student achievement. However, what we don't have is a way to improve the achievement compact process from the perspective of a continual view of longitudinal effects of achievement progress in different areas. For instance, what is the effect of making a big difference in sixth grade attendance and how does that compare and contrast perhaps with some measures at the third grade, the ninth grade, or the 12th grade? Are those measures linked together? Do changes in achievement compact metrics for one student presage or sort of foretell how those exact same kids are going to do with response to metrics later? Do kids who read better have higher attendance in sixth grade? Do students who get more credits in the 12th grade complete college at a higher rate? We actually don't know that right now. That would be a tremendous opportunity and provide some internal consistency or analysis of achievement compacts. Third opportunity is the possibility for aligned systems within our P through 12 system. Again, nothing wrong with silos as long as silos are communicating, but when they're not, we have problems. And some of the biggest possible opportunities in my eyes and in our eyes who've examined this with respect to common or aligned systems are making our systems more equitable. Every time you transition from one institution, one school, one segment, one sector to another, there's a possibility of data being lost, data being duplicated, and so on. Who transitions the most and who is the most mobile? Well, often it's someone from a population that right now is probably not scoring as high with respect to 40-40-20 as others. So the extent to which we take the penalty of moving from institution to institution, we support all kids. And then finally, and this one every time I talk about it I get chills, so I'll do the best I can to not get chills and say something silly, is as an educator, there's 50,000 students per grade in Oregon right now in school, doing stuff. They're making decisions every minute about how they spend their time, what classes they're going to take as they get older, what schools they're going to go to, what professional certifications they might pursue. They are active agents, and they outnumber us tremendously, 58-1 in one classroom, right? To the degree that students are agents in their own learning in an effective manner, that represents an opportunity across our state to have higher achievement in all the things that we've been talking about today. And how do you make students better agents? Well, there's lots of stuff in K-12 and I'm sure in post-secondary about having kids be better agents in their own learning. The one I know most about is goal setting. Students who have goals, whether they're short-term or long-term goals, achieve at higher rates. I think we see that. It's a commonsensical statement that we see all of us across every element of our lives, is being goal-driven. I mean, and then there's a limit to it because you don't want to be insanely goal-driven, but generally being goal-driven leads to higher achievement. The opportunity that's possible with this longitudinal database system is supporting students' drive and goals by giving them the evidence of their achievements and giving them some tools to be able to figure out where they're going to go next based on data. Could be based on workforce data, could be based on degrees that are being offered right now. It could be based on the students' own interests and their own personality as a result of assessments that they might do. So the opportunity here, I believe, is transformative to give something back to students, some value add that could make a huge, huge difference. And I can talk ad nauseum about that one. I'll come back to it with the questions. I think it's a huge opportunity. And then there's the consequences of doing nothing. This exact title, The Consequences of Doing Nothing, is something that I'm required to answer, we're required to answer to the legislature as part of our proposal in February. Our major deliverable is a business case that asks for a certain amount of money based on an analysis of problems, an analysis of alternatives, and then a chosen alternative. But always one alternative is do nothing. Well, the consequences are, first of all, we continue to fail to meet the requirement of Senate Bill 909. And that was due in 2012. Second thing is this group and others continue to make decisions, investment and policy decisions with insufficient data. Not that we haven't used data, but a lot of the data we've used is not Oregon data. And I think it's important to note that sufficient Oregon outcome data, as John said an hour or so ago, is this close. We don't need to collect one iota extra piece of data from any of our schools or our university partners right now to have some of the answers that we need. We just haven't had the will or the plan in how to combine it. Third bullet is we stay disconnected and incompatible, and that's bad for all the reasons I mentioned before. And then the last one is we don't have that equitable access for students, and then there's no potential for transformative effects. So the next step in our process after identifying these problems is, well, what are the alternatives? And one of the richest sources to consider alternatives is the 50 states of the United States and all of the individual methods that they're using to meet this goal. And Oregon's goals are not exactly the same. Oregon's problems are not exactly the same, but they're very, very similar and analogous in so many levels that it was very, very instructive for our team literally to read all 50 states' plans for longitudinal databases. And there's been a lot of learning that we've gleaned from that, and probably some of the answers to your questions I'll refer to certain states. But the most important thing for all of you to understand, I believe, is that there's two families of solutions. One is a consolidated or comprehensive solution, and one is a federated solution. The consolidated solution, and Massachusetts is the one system maybe that's the most quintessential version of that, is a system where all statewide data, a data warehouse data about students and their progress and the courses they take and where they go to school, how often they attend, all that stuff goes into one large database. The federated solution is that instead of having one big database, you keep existing agency and institution databases and you mine out or take out only what's necessary for your statewide organization to do its work. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both of these. A couple things about the consolidated approach, and when we scored this, it was really, really clear because we scored 7 different alternatives, 4 of which were consolidated. Consolidated solutions have tremendous potential long-term power for a body such as this to ask questions on a dime because you own the data. So instead of having to maybe wait for weeks for some group to mine data, you can literally have access to live student data immediately. Also, if you own all that data in a consolidated system, you are not beholden to the individual institutions and whatever their rules or policies might be or how they might change over time. You kind of own the whole thing. The negatives of consolidation are cost and risk and security, which, as it turns out, turned out to be 3 of the most significant metrics we measured the alternatives in Oregon against: cost, risk, and security. It's bigger, so it costs more. It's riskier because you put confidential student information in a very large system that's a target, quite frankly, that isn't presented if you don't have that big personally identifiable database. Did I say risk and security? Well, risk, so security and cost. Why is it risky to do a consolidated solution? Well, imagine the high stakes nature of a OEIB consolidated database that every school, district, community college, and university depended upon on a day-to-day basis for data. And think of how important it would be if that system were to fail for not a month or a day, an hour. So it's risky. Federated solutions are not as powerful because you don't have all the data right there. You have a subset of data. It's the data you've asked for, but you have to be smart and thoughtful about the data that you're asking for so that you can get it from these different agencies. Federated solutions are also not as nimble in that you can't immediately go into it and pull live data. Positives to it is they are less costly, less risky, and less vulnerable to security issues. And I mentioned Massachusetts as an example of consolidated. There are other states who have consolidated, and there's also a lot of states who have federated solutions. The recommendation from the federal government in terms of how they weigh these two is more towards the consolidated approach. But I have to say, in essentially every conversation that I've had in Oregon with stakeholders throughout the spectrum, there's been much, much greater interest in federated and a lot of nervousness and concern about consolidated. But to do our due diligence is the work that we did for OEIB. Our case examines consolidated and federated approaches.
I think we've got a question here.
Please.
Peter, and I just want to point out we're about 25 minutes into a 30-minute item, so
Okay?
I won't take Mark's question away from your time.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Wasn't the original vision of the Senate bill along the lines of consolidated?
No, the bill actually states that it could be done either with a new data system or by building on existing. It's actually quite clear that either option is good. I'll go fast, Chairman Spildy. Selection criteria that we used, again, the cost, risks, and security outweigh the alignment to goals and future opportunities, and that was a particular decision. The recommended solution that's come from our project team is a federated solution with a new governance structure. The federated solution would build on the ODE's existing data warehouse, and it would also work with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to help them stand up a data warehouse at the HEC that would incorporate data from the Community College and Workforce Development, as well as what's historically been kept at the Chancellor's Office at the Oregon University System. The OEIB would get data from the ODE and HEC, and with that would create a de-identified longitudinal database and also that personal record of student achievement. Very high-level project plan is here. There's a slide for it. I'm not going to go over it in much detail. It's in front of you, and we might have questions about it. I do want to point out, again, apropos to what John Taponia said earlier, year one, it is not a heavy lift at all in year one to be getting the longitudinal database of investments and outcomes to you. The data is there. It's just a connection process. It'll take much longer to develop that student personal record because that's going to involve a lot of stakeholder input that as of yet has not been solicited. And now I'm on to problems. And like I said before, I've listed some up here, so maybe as a way to prompt some problems, you can take a look at the bulleted list up here. Thank you.
Peter, thanks for the deep and thorough analysis that you and your team have been doing. I think it's very, very helpful. It's great to understand your thinking to get to your recommendation. I'd just open it to questions.
Peter, there's been a lot of investment for a lot of years on database systems, the most recent being Project Alder, a significant federal grant for that. So what I saw was a recommendation for option number 2. And my question is this, were all those existing efforts that have through the department and other entities like Alder, have we built upon that to get to this point today with that recommendation?
Absolutely. And again, to reinforce the reason we made that selection, in some ways it would have been a waste of a tremendous amount of effort and alignment among agencies that are beyond the scope of OEIB, that include the Oregon Employment Department and others. We'd be tossing that away and starting over to some degree. So this does build on Project Alder.
Julie. Comment and then question. So the comment is, I love the concept of students being agents with their own learning and improvement, because I've seen that personally happen with my own kids. So I think that's a great concept if we can sort of keep it focused on the students and what benefit is to them. The two questions I would have, one, timeline based. You mentioned it was 2012, we were supposed to have it. So what is the timeline you've laid out a realistic, assuming funding, a realistic timeline, so 3 years before we have it in place?
So with respect to the opportunities and the goals of the project, the most immediate deliverable would be a P through 20 de-identified aggregated policy database that you could use and policymakers could use to track investments and outcomes and model, and that's easily within a year, if not sooner, because these data sets exist right now. They literally sit sometimes in the same building in separate servers and have been waiting for a place to land and some governance. With respect to making students better agents in their learning by giving that student longitudinal, up here we say 3 years. That might be a little conservative. It could be 2, but I felt like being conservative was the right thing to do. So it's a complicated answer. In terms of what you're going to see and what Echo Northwest or others or HEC is going to have access to, that's an almost immediate deliverable. I think a year feels like almost immediate. Some other stuff's going to take a little bit longer to produce.
So the last piece that I'm interested in is the whole issue of student privacy. And just sort of given all the data breaches, all over the world, the issue of privacy from a public policy standpoint is evolving because of new issues that come out through technology. And I'm just wondering how big of an issue or how exactly you would construct a system in which student privacy is one of the main priorities.
Sure. One is your design choice. So if you design a consolidated system, you immediately incur a tremendous amount of risk that system could be gotten into. That's the price of having live data. Our proposal is that you're not going to have live data. And I'll just outline just very, very briefly, but this is done, Echo Northwest does it with data that we submit to them. This is done routinely, is that the ODE with student level data and the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and the Oregon Education Department would be supplying records that would be matched. And the matching algorithm usually involves name, date of birth, different things occur that would create a longitudinal record, a lot of them. And then the next step immediately is that all of the fields in that database, like name, would be stripped out, would be taken out. It's called a de-identification process. And it's the kind of thing that in Oregon what we would propose and what other states already happen, this moment of matching is a very, very secure, time-limited event. And as that is done, what you're left with is completely de-identified, and all the stuff that you built it with is flushed and isn't at the OEIB at all. And so I think really from a planning point of view, it's the most secure way that we could do it. If you want and want to follow student progress through the system, and it's clear from some of the discussions that all those things are of interest to this group. So the answer is that we've designed it to be as secure as you could make it.
Thanks. I've got Yvonne and then Dick and David on deck.
Okay, 3 comments I wanted to make and then a question. So I think this is a great building on previous work. Alder project, other things that have been going on, so thank you for sort of moving us finally. I think it's a thorough process that I think, from my perspective, you've looked at a lot of things, and again, having been involved at the weeds level, it's nice to know somebody knows how we should be looking at the whole thing, so I appreciate that. I love the personal student record piece again, for students to be empowered to have their data and be involved in that process is really powerful. I have a quick question and then one last comment, and that is that having been involved in the development of data warehouse for 10 plus years in at least the K-12 system, are we at a place where there's one data warehouse yet for the whole state? I didn't think we were there yet.
We are not actually at the Oregon Department of Ed, and it's their major piece of work that they're literally is going on right now. We have a couple of different databases that collect data from districts for different purposes, and that's been an internal goal, and now it's been fueled by this process and all the discussions around it to get to that point. So I'm really, really confident that it is occurring. I mean, it's a weekly kind of progress update that we're seeing that, partially to support our project, but also to support value add to school districts.
Great, that's exciting to hear. And then the last comment I have is about your project plan. First of all, I get the impatience that we haven't met what we needed to in 2012, but there are so many of us who've been working on this for 10 plus years, thinking it was a pretty logical and easy problem to work our way through, and being really naive about that, pulling tons of groups together and finding out that just by talking to a whole bunch of people about what they want doesn't actually get us to a solution about what we need. So I appreciate this approach, and I just want to say that it feels like you feel confident that this 1, 2, 3 year step process will get us there, and I know there's probably still that impatience on our board that we want to be there faster, but because I've been involved in this work for a really long time, I know that it doesn't go fast, and when you try to go fast, it just gets messier. It's really important to make sure we have a comprehensive plan. And the last comment I wanted to make is that I like this process because we all, I think, get really concerned about the risk of student information being out there, and it just seems like this is a way that will protect them to the best degree that we can at this point based on what we know. So I just want to commend you for the work, how quickly I think you've put this together. And I know that a 3-year plan sounds like a long time out, but in the meantime, if you notice, we're actually going to have access to some information in year 1, and that's farther than we've been forever. So thank you, congratulations. Dave.
2 comments, or a comment and a question. The first comment is, though, I think the general public, though, is kind of gun shy of the government being data collection for a whole bunch of reasons. And then our state of Oregon has not had a real good reputation the last 20 years. DMV comes to my mind, and I think the state police have had a problem with the data. So I think from you being on the outside, Peter, I think it's great that you can see some of the whole field, but hopefully we can be successful in spending the funds to go at the end. And then my question is and I remember now I'm a member of the Early Learning Council, and I report back to my boss, Pam Curtis.
Yes.
I see a lot of initials in here, but I don't see any ELC. So how does that fit in? How does the early childhood piece fit into the whole data picture?
Thank you for asking that.
Straight away on that too, can you maybe allude to how we can get SSID numbers in early learning, if that's part of the conversation?
I'll try on that second. I think I probably answer both. So the ELC data system work, there's a data governance committee that the ELC has convened, and I've met with that group, I've presented to that group, and that's a fascinating discussion about data because it involves combining data from sectors that we ordinarily haven't combined data before: health, human services, and early education opportunities. The ELC, don't want to throw too many, you guys know all the abbreviations, so it's fine. So the ELC has a charge that's performed by the Early Learning Division of the ODE. And the intent is that the data work that's going on through early learning is going to find its home in this ODE data warehouse. And as a matter of fact, the technical consultants that have been hired by ELC to design the early learning systems are the same technical consultants that we hired to work on our business case. And the key reason for that was we wanted to have our eye on making sure that nothing in our project plan was not tied to the expected results that are coming out of that ELC. So where it sits is ODE. That's the vision of what database that it would sit in ultimately as you aggregate up. But I can say right now that the first year of ELC data collection is going to be spreadsheets. They're a long way from electronic data collection in the hubs or wherever else. They're farther down the road, or they're farther away from being able to provide information that's going to be part of these longitudinal records. But we're trying to line that all up. One other thing I want to say about any comparison of this data system to others, and I don't mean this to sound wrong, but this is a low stakes system. The educational investments are high stakes. It's no joke how much money we spend. We've got to do it better. We've got to do it right. But if this data system went down and you folks could not get a report out of it for about a week, the engines of schools don't stop turning. Maybe there's some. It's very, very different than providing solutions out to every Oregonian or many, many, many Oregonians. And in addition, this personal record is not going to replace the transcript. It's not going to replace the function of institutions to give final data. This is a tool for students to goal plan and see what they've accomplished. And it wouldn't be great for that system to go down for a couple days, but it's not going to stop the wheels of a driver's license or getting signed up for health care, whatever it may be. So I understand that the comparison is always going to be there to other data systems. I think this one is really, really different in its nature, character, and design.
May I follow up? I would encourage you, Peter, as you do these presentations, that you would bring in, and I'm really serious because we want the public to buy into exactly what we're doing from the early learning clear through so we can do our whole gamut of goal setting. And you would help us, I believe, if you would bring in part of that so we can see that in this presentation.
I will. And great, thank you so much for catching that, because it's a good warm-up for the legislative presentation.
Any vision on that SSID issue?
Well, currently students who go to Head Start do get an SSID, and all the mechanisms are in place at ODE to assign SSID numbers even earlier. But from the ODE's perspective, that's not a hard solution. But a lot of these early learning experiences, they don't have any kind of a data system. They keep track of stuff by hand. And so how are they going to submit a record to see if that kid already has an SSID? And that's more of a heavier lift, not so much for the ODE side, but for all these providers. So it's a question, to be honest, I don't know the degree to which the ELC data team has thought it out yet. It's an important one. I just don't know where we are in it. Some states assign a student a ID number at birth, like Vermont does that. I don't feel like there's an appetite for that in Oregon. But maybe, but that'd be more than just this project scope.
David? Yeah, just a few points. I'm glad to see the student's role in the database records serving the student and families. I think that's something we talked about in LearnWorks way back when, and it's come up on some of the subcommittees, but I think some of it's been lost in the bigger discussion at the state about why the use of data and how it can help learning. So I think that's helpful to see. I have two questions. One is for the reasons you stated, I like the federated idea, particularly with security. And I think following up on what Dick said, it is going to be important that you explain a little bit further what are the security steps involved in the system, because I think there is going to be some skepticism of that. It certainly has been, as we've talked about this before, and I think that would be real important to reassure the public what is secure in the system particularly. And my first question is, on that is the only time it gets pooled in a statewide data is when it's de-identified, or is there going to be specific identity markers in that data as it's pulled together, and what are the security implications of that, maybe in 30 words or less?
So I think the answer is yes, it won't exist in an identified state for anyone's viewing, except that maybe the database administrator performs that match and the de-identification process. And the longitudinal records, and we talked before about the scoreboard coming out every quarterly. That seems to be a good rotation to create these records, but they won't be identifiable records. That's our suggestion.
Okay. And my other question is, you talked about the effects each step, each benchmark in the education continuum has on the others. So, third grade reading achievement, sixth grade attendance, things like that on something much further down the spectrum. We had a presentation on the dashboard for this board, and although I think it didn't rely on all this data you're talking about, it was a little bit cruder because of that. I still thought it was somewhat a good picture of what those steps are, and somewhat accurate based on that. So,
absolutely.
Is that something this could feed into or help refine?
Absolutely. This plan was developed in close concert with folks in the OEIB who are examining the Achievement Compact process and were there at its inception. And the notion is to have this system support, for instance, to automatically populate information about achievement metrics for districts so that could happen with some automaticity. But it also provides the way to probe and maybe to ask questions down the line that we were not thought to ask this year. Somebody could come up with a question that we haven't asked yet about some of those metrics or others, and this is a way to continue to use Oregon data. One thing I do want to make really, really clear, and Yvonne Curtis, when you asked the questions, I almost said it, but I just want to make sure folks understand about data. It's going to be really important for the OEIB data system to know exactly the kind of data that you folks want out of it, because there's a lot of data. We need policymakers like groups like this to specify the scope and the nature of the questions that we want answered. And then we focus on that work and then provide that information. And on some periodic basis, maybe revise the kinds of questions we're looking for, and that's fine. But what we can't do is allow for every other week a different set of questions to be the mandate for this work, because that is impossible. Then we're chasing a lot of different things. And again, I think what's so valuable about the discussion today about 40-40-20 is getting that focus, that similar question that we're going to ask over time. And the achievement compacts are those as well. And so hopefully they're not going to change a lot, but they might change over time, and better to inform it with data, Oregon data.
So I think you're getting at where I was going. What data, for what purpose? If it's for policymakers, the data that we're collecting to be able to make decisions, that's one thing. Because I think when we initially started this, it was, because I remember the last presentation and I asked the question, is this to help direct instruction to educators? And the answer was yes, and there was no path to have that happen. So what I'm hearing from you is this has nothing to do with educators working with students on a day-to-day basis. This has a lot to do, or everything to do, with policymakers having information about where students are and the investments that we've made, how that's impacting where they're at.
Yes, and I can't emphasize enough how critical it is as key communicators for the state around this particular issue, that it's crystal clear that this is not a tool for teachers to improve instruction. It's not going to involve any extra inputting from teachers, and the kinds of answers that it's going to give. Teachers might be interested in statewide trends and things like that, and they might use that to talk about careers in their class or what have you, but formative assessment and things like that are going to come from districts, the Oregon Department of Ed, the HEC, CCWD, wherever, not this system. And that mission creep from where this started to where it got over time is something that we've had to work to put back into the box. There's nothing wrong with good data for teachers, but we're not the right agency to give it to them, in our opinion.
And just to follow up, so in the last presentation, I believe the price tag attached to this was around $55 million.
Right.
I don't see a price tag and you're asking us to take action.
We literally finished the business case today. It's 99 pages long, really happy that it's a done deal, and it wasn't done when we did the PowerPoint. So the recommended alternative is a little over $8 million. One of the alternatives we examined was $88 million. So there's a huge range from 88, there's the 50-ish number that's probably akin to what you saw with the first specs, and then there's one all the way down at a little over 5. And that's something I have in an executive summary document that I assume this is a great group that would like to read it, and it vets all the different alternatives in a variety of ways, and cost is right there in the document.
I guess I'm a little bit confused, because this is a system that it supports students being agents in their own learning and goal setting, and then you just said it's for policymakers, and it has nothing to do with teachers and instruction. I guess I'm wondering how teachers are just, and instruction is completely out of
Right.
the picture when we think it's going to be helpful to students and they're going to be setting goals based on this. So to me, there's a little bit of disconnect, because what your answer just implied was this is all about giving information to policymakers, and really it won't have anything to do with teachers.
Right.
So then how does it have any, how can students use it?
Thank you. So the great question. Thank you very much. And it is confusing when you look at all these different folks, and that's why the first slide, who needs to see stuff over time and why. So I think it's clear for the board why the policy stuff is critical, why the outcomes investment stuff is critical. The next question might be, well, why even have this personal achievement record? Why is that OEIB's business? Kids already get that kind of data from their institutions. And the fact is, in our analysis, institutions do give a lot of data back to teachers about how they're doing. In schools, they have data teams. They do all kinds of work to do this kind of data at the staff level. But there is a tremendous deficit for the student feedback, and compounding that is, when students move from district to district, that information doesn't necessarily carry forward. So Salem School District, to name one, has a great system where every single kid in Salem School District has a planning tool that enables them to look at their future and do their plan and profile and move forward in the system. But if they move from Salem to another district, it's not there anymore. And so when we looked at this, the students stuck out as being a group that if we don't provide a top-down guarantee that every student and young adult is going to have this repository of achievement, the only other way to do it is an unfunded mandate on all of our systems. And that's the cheapest alternative. We don't get into the business of keeping student educational records at all, even a low-stakes one for kids. We don't help them plan. We just tell every district, you have to do it.
We're sorry. Your conference is ending now.
Thank you, Peter.
That's the hook.
But that's not a hint. I don't
So it's a great question. Maybe it deserves greater exploration. I'd be happy to do it. And it seems counterintuitive at first, but it seems really intuitive to me now, but it's taken a while. And I don't know if my answer hit it for you, but...
Yes, but I do think for parents it will, because somehow it just seems strange to say this is going to be a great tool for kids to set their learning goals, and then say, and yet it's not going to really have anything to do with teachers or instruction. I think you're going to have to connect the dots more to make it a logical argument. But having to sell this, and not sell it, but explain to the community what the value is.
Yeah. And as I'd have to say, my wife's a school counselor, I'd have to say that this is much more about counseling and comprehensive guidance and another tool in that quiver than it is about day-to-day instructional change. Not that day-to-day instructional change isn't the meat and potatoes of what we do, but this lack of comprehensive counseling guidance for all kids is a glaring issue, and staffing levels are not there to provide any path to making that really different.
We need to wrap this up. I just want to make sure there's anyone on this side of the table that wants to ask a question of Peter. Seeing none, I think it's been requested that we give some level of support from the board to send with Peter to the legislature. And if there's any comfort level, I'd like maybe perhaps a motion that we can discuss and decide if we're ready to do that.
Maybe, Peter, what is it you want and need at this stage of the game?
Well, I think being able to report to the legislature that this meeting has been held and that there's some sense of the OEIB that this is the direction that you feel comfortable moving forward with. I don't know if that's a motion. I hadn't, that's my fault. I really should have come up with some motion-y language. But that maybe someone else could do better, but you know.
I'm willing to try, and then the committee could just add on or change. I would like to move that we recommend or vote to recommend this, to allow OEIB to move forward on this high-level project plan with what's defined in year 1, year 2, and 3.
You know, to add to that, you've had two different models, composite, and are you wanting direction and motion on that?
Our recommendation is the federated model. We do not recommend a consolidated.
We're approving the federated model.
Yeah, you can say the selected model from the business case, perhaps.
Just clarify.
And it sounds like a plan on this high-level project plan. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Second, Julia. Any further discussion by the board? Sam?
I have a long-standing practice of not voting for anything without looking at the whole price tag. And I hear what you're saying, and it sounds good, but I like to see the price tag on things that I vote on.
And, well, I greatly appreciate all the work, and I think this has come so far from the last presentation, and the passion for how it actually helps students is embedded in this. I'm struggling with not seeing what Samuel just addressed with the price tag and the implications of that.
So it is $8.238 million for 5 years. I mean, I'm not sure if you having more time to reflect on it would make a difference, but that is the consultant's costing out of this alternative.
Can you say it again? Yeah.
8.3 something million dollars. I'm sorry. I mean, literally, I could open up my computer and get the exact number because we did the final calculations, but it's 8.3.
Over 5 years, did you say, or?
Over 5 years, and that yes.
So maybe, not to amend the motion, but it might be useful just as a follow-up to send in a one-pager the cost specs to the board, just so.
The Senate bill allocated a certain amount of money, did it not?
It spoke to $10 million. That number was not based on anything in particular. I think it was just a placeholder, really.
So,
I think Ben has
Ben, thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, and Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of this proposal is that it would be to recommend to the legislature that they use their bonding authority to make these dollars available. So this would not come out of the general operating funds of the state, except insofar as those were required to pay back the bonds over time. But this would essentially be a capital project that, under state constitution, we're allowed to do for this type of data system.
So
Correct.
The debt service on bonds.
And I think the 8.3 is actually the bond sale proceeds themselves. The debt service would play out over some number of years.
Right.
Thanks for that clarification. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, I'd like to call for a vote, and I think we might do a roll call.
The phone hung up, so we don't have Kay on the line. Do you want me to call her in so that she can vote?
That would be, do we have a quorum with either?
We do, yes.
It would be great if you could.
just 1 second. So Mary, can you recap exactly what we are now and what we're at?
Maybe just ask, Nancy hasn't spoken, but I'm assuming that our chief education
Yes,
officer
sorry,
is recommending this.
You're assuming what?
That you are recommending we approve this?
Oh, yes, I am.
To
I mean,
AT&T
2012,
teleconference
to
service.
me, this makes a
Please
lot of
enter your
sense, and
access
it's
code,
much
followed by the pound
more
sign.
cost effective than the way we were
I
headed.
just wanted to be clear.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah. I was looking for the exact figure
Including
when you
you.
asked.
You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press *#.
Just give staff a minute to see if they're communicating.
Are you there, Kay?
Yes, I'm back on.
Okay, Kay, we're considering a motion that the board will support the proposal for a federated, is that the right term?
Yes.
Federated system of data collection and the high-level project plan as described to the board with a price tag of approximately $8.3 million. That's what we're voting on. So with that, Seth, could I ask you to do...
Julia Graham Edwards,
Aye.
Yvonne Curtis,
Aye.
Samuel Henry,
Yes.
Nicole Jean Maher,
Aye.
Mark Mobill,
Aye.
David Reeves,
Aye.
Ron Saxton,
Yes.
Mary Spilker,
Yes.
Kay Duran,
Yes.
Anna Vendry,
No.
Dick Whitnell.
Yes.
The motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Good luck with the legislature. Okay, let's move on to the draft OEIB Communications and Engagement Plan. Kristen, welcome.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Kristen Gimbel, the OEIB Communications Director, and I'm pleased to be before you this afternoon to present the direction that I'm heading in as it relates to planning for communications and engagement in the months and years ahead. As you all know, our strategic plan calls for us to build an engaged and motivated public. And so again, today I'll be presenting the direction that I propose we move forward in to do just that. I think you'll find that the emphasis is really on engagement because I believe that there is the most significant opportunity within the engagement realm. The goals, as far as I see them, are really twofold. To leverage this plan to guide our articulation of the vision for education in Oregon and the initiatives that we see to achieve that vision, and to develop engagement strategies to really galvanize communities around the state in taking collective responsibility for student success. For the purposes of this plan, I've included core target audiences, which include legislators, education leaders, teachers and faculty, parents, families, and students, and what I'm calling key influencers: business and community leaders, the media, advocacy organizations, and nonprofit groups. I'll jump into the presentation in a moment, but I wanted to share very briefly the approach, the three-pronged approach that I took to inform the recommendations that you see. And then I'll dive into the approach a little bit deeper. So the first mechanism that I use to really inform the strategies that I'll recommend is plotting statewide engagement for Dr. Golden from August to December, her tenure thus far, to really look from a regional perspective, from an issue perspective, from a group perspective, how we've engaged the state of Oregon in the conversation on education to date. Secondarily, conducted interviews with more than 50 individuals throughout the education continuum, community-based organizations, and other individuals who intersect with education to better understand existing perspectives, key issues of import to that particular individual and community, and to better understand opportunities to align communications and engagement to best extend our reach throughout the state. and then finally have incorporated existing initiatives that we're already working on, be it the regional achievement collaboratives, the statewide reading campaign, early learning hubs, strategic investments, and others. For the purposes of today, I'm really going to focus on the mapping that I've just mentioned, as well as the interviews. So if you can see here, if we map on the state of Oregon engagement from August to December, you can see where Dr. Golden has participated in various engagement opportunities throughout the state. And you can see, this will come as no surprise to anyone here, she's been busy. She's done a lot of work to get out and engage with communities around the state. This also presents some information that I think we can use to determine where perhaps we haven't engaged and where we should prioritize engaging moving forward. So the coast, for example, and other areas in rural Oregon. This next slide just gives us a little bit of a deeper look. Those that are outlined in orange are places where she's visited once or more, so more than one time, for the purposes of an event or a community forum. And again, I think this provides important information as we do planning moving forward to really look at going to communities where we haven't been before perhaps we go back to a community we've already engaged with multiple times. So looking at this same period of engagement and dividing it by group, this chart was really derived by taking a look at any of the events, forums, conferences that Dr. Golden participated in, and where there were 5 or more of any one group that you see listed here, I included them for the purposes of this chart. So quite naturally, for many events, there were multiple groups who were there, and I wanted to be able to capture for you all the level of engagement with groups. Legislators are the one exception here. I included legislators even if one was present, because certainly it's important to engage them whether there's one or multiple. Certainly a few things that will really pop right out to you all, as they did to me. There's no intentional engagement here with students. Students aren't on this chart at all. There's certainly a low percentage of engagement among parents. There's a high percentage of engagement among the K-12 population, and this includes educators and education leaders. If we take a closer look at just the birth to college and career continuum, again for the same period of engagement, I've mapped the continuum based on visits as well as conversations, just to give you a sense of the type of engagement happening. Again, it's K-12 focus, which certainly is in line with our reflections internally and those we've talked about at this group and among P20 as something that we need to be really cognizant about. What I think will be interesting is, given Dr. Golden's emerging priorities around age 3 to grade 3 in reading, as well as the transition to high school to college, I think this will look very different in a year's time. So it'll be interesting to watch that. The second component of my findings was really to conduct stakeholder interviews. Again, I really worked to be as comprehensive as possible, engaging with folks from across the continuum and from around the state in varying community organizations, some of which are listed here, the kinds of groups that I connected with. At the end of every interview, the one question that I asked each and every interviewee is, who else should I be talking to? Who else should I really understand their perspective? Who else's voice needs to be at the table? I now have more than 100 individuals on a list who I fully intend to connect with over the next 6 months as I think about rounding out and really refining this plan.
Kristen, you started like a key communicator with kids.
I do, and you'll see that later on in here. For the purposes of the interviews, I really looked at intending to understand the baseline for each of these target groups that I mentioned at the beginning. What's their understanding of the OEIB? What's their understanding of the state's vision for education? I wanted to test assumptions about key issues within education that are most critical to each of these groups, and to really better understand the most effective modes for reaching each of the target groups. And then finally, to learn about existing initiatives and communication opportunities where we can really align to better leverage and extend that reach into the state. There are a few important takeaways that I wanted to share that really came through loud and clear across these interviews. The first one will, again, come as no surprise to many of you. There's widespread respect for Dr. Golden and a real belief that she's the right person at the right time to lead this very important work. That said, there's some confusion about what exactly the Chief Education Officer can and will do to impact student achievement in Oregon. There was a reflection that one of Dr. Golden's greatest assets is her ability to engage. And so you'll see later in this plan that I recommend really bringing that into the fold in a way that we can leverage it most effectively. And finally, the further the interviewee was from high-level state leadership, the less they really knew and understood the vision for Oregon, the agencies responsible for conducting the work, and ultimately the role that they played in it. The final piece that I looked at as I considered recommendations for this plan was again to really incorporate existing initiatives and ongoing efforts to make sure that we're aligned, that we're streamlining, and that we're really leveraging statewide opportunities to the greatest degree possible. So at this point, I'd like to share my recommendations for the Communications and Engagement Plan, and I'll be doing so by target audience. So I'll share briefly any high-level common themes based on the audience, and then some recommendations. The suggestions that I'll share are really highly targeted for these groups, and the intention is really to leverage them in addition to a host of traditional communications mechanisms and engagement strategies, which you'll see later on in the plan. So the first group is legislators. I think we have an opportunity to make it increasingly simple for legislators to understand the vision for education and the evidence that drives it. Recommending that we increasingly set up targeted meetings with legislators and that we strategically engage them in their communities and in the school communities where they live. With respect to education leaders, I found that generally education leaders really have a good understanding of the role of OEIB and the Chief Education Officer. The exception I found here was school board members who seem to have a lack of clarity of the role that they play in achieving the 40-40-20 vision and how they can best support student achievement in line with the 40-40-20 goals. Across the board, education leaders said face-to-face connection is the best way to communicate with me and to bring me along with this vision. And so I'm recommending deeper engagement opportunities with education leaders. Certainly that we continue to participate in conferences and events, but that we seek more Q&A sessions and more dialogue to really deeply engage education leaders so that they can then be ambassadors in their own communities.
I'm sorry, just a quick question.
Sure.
I'm struggling with education leaders who said school board.
Thank you.
Can you define who education leaders are?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So for the purposes of this, I've taken all education leaders across the community college, university, and K-12 realm to include superintendents, principals, school board members, senior faculty, presidents, et cetera, at the university level. So it's pretty comprehensive. Is that helpful? Sure. In addition, with an acknowledgement that it is quite a large state, and at the end of the day, our work is to really leverage Dr. Golden's time and the board's time to best achieve these goals. I've recommended things like targeted video messages that could serve to really inform and inspire school boards, for example, that I think we should consider. And then working with community organizations to develop common talking points and collateral materials that they can use in their own communities to best share and communicate about the vision and the 40-40-20 goals. With respect to teachers and faculty, I found that generally educators have a good understanding of the notion of building a seamless system and the work towards 40-40-20. Beyond that, some of the distinctions between the agencies across the continuum and the specifics of how we'll achieve 40-40-20 really felt less clear. I believe that we have an opportunity to engage and involve educators in a much deeper way, activating them in the vision while acknowledging the certain limitations of their own time and certainly the scope of the state. So I'm recommending that we convene an educator roundtable group of sorts that might include K-12 educators as well as higher education leaders, really bringing their voice to the table in a way that allows them to feel engaged and certainly helps deepen our recommendations around policy and investment. Again, seeking deeper engagement opportunities where we can dialogue and have some question and answers. And then leveraging existing communication pieces, be it OEA communication going out and others. And then finally creating a video message, again, where we can have Dr. Golden communicate directly with educators, possibly as part of a fall kickoff going back into school, maybe paired with some sort of dialogue and opportunity for discussion at the local level. With respect to parents and families of students, if you recall from the earlier slide, parents are really a group that we haven't fully engaged to the extent that I think we all want to and think we should. Parents almost universally don't understand the role of the OEIB. And even those that are engaged see the OEIB from very narrow lenses. For example, the strategic investments. This is particularly true for parents from communities of color, again, don't even know that the OEIB exists at all. We have found community-based forums to be a really effective way, especially if they're targeted by community, to really connect with parents and create a dialogue around the future for their child in education. So I'm recommending that we continue to do that, and we continue to do that in a targeted way throughout the state. I think the statewide reading campaign really presents a tremendous opportunity to engage parents in something that's really tangible, that's aligned with our higher targets for students, and really gives them something to grab onto as it relates to the 40-40-20 goals. So I'm recommending that we leverage the PTA and other parent groups and encourage their focus on literacy. I understand the PTA is already focused on literacy this year. And then importantly, that we deeply leverage community organizations and culturally specific organizations to ensure they're mobilizing, engaging communities around reading as well. And finally, with students. As you saw from an earlier slide, we've really yet to meaningfully engage students. I know this is something that Nancy's been excited about since she started, really putting together a student advisory council. And I think that's a tremendous idea. I think we might consider including higher ed students as well, really giving them an opportunity to put their hands on the steering wheel of some of the issues that are most important to them, access and affordability, and that transition from high school to college. I'm recommending that we participate in key forums that are designated to target students, and I've listed some of them up on the slide, but certainly there are many, many others. That we engage the students as well in the statewide reading campaign. I think it presents a tremendous opportunity either from a service perspective, perhaps it's older students reading to younger students, doing a book drive, or certainly pulling in social media, creating a fun handle and getting a prompt for Instagram or something that we can engage these older students in helping to generate some excitement around reading. And as I mentioned at the beginning, in complement with all of these specific targeted strategies that I've mentioned, I'm recommending a host of traditional tools for outreach, many of which are pretty straightforward, but I'd like to go through a few of them and point them out. Under the targeted visits section, we talked quite a bit at the P20 level about how we can be more strategic about having board meetings throughout the state to really ensure that we're having an equitable presence as we hold and convene meetings at the state level. From the website standpoint, I'm recommending that we include a birth to college and career tab on the OEIB website. It's in process now, such that we can include descriptions about each of the agencies across the education continuum and their role in contributing to a seamless system and ultimately achieving 40-40-20. that we include website translation in multiple languages that's really dynamic and updates automatically, that mobilizing of stakeholder messengers becomes a core part of our strategy, that we acknowledge that there is a lot of work to do and a significant scope from a statewide perspective, and that leveraging individuals who can be ambassadors for the vision for education in Oregon, like the OEIB board, is something that I believe we should focus on. And at the end of this presentation, I'll be asking all of you what kinds of tools you all need as board members to really be successful in being an ambassador for education conversations. And then finally, I'm recommending convening a communications cabinet, which will be comprised of designees from across the continuum, myself, representatives from the governor's office, and certainly workforce as well. And I think we can have regional pockets of that, to my mind. So the next steps, moving forward, drafting key messages that are aligned with the governor's key messages and strategy, setting specific goals for communications and engagement, and then ultimately activating the plan in support of students. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any feedback or questions, since I ran through that very quickly, and offer a prompt to you all. What tools can we provide you so that in being ambassadors for communicating and engaging in this work, you can be successful? Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. It's just very organized and detailed, and I really appreciate that. Comments, questions? Julia?
So I'll answer your question about the tools.
Yeah.
So I think OEIB's role is so broad and 50,000-foot level that most people can't relate to it because it's, it's something of interest, I think, to a very specific group of policymakers. And if I think about the people that I want to engage and mobilize and activate, it's parents across the state. And so I think to do that, what the tool I need is you have to be able to pivot from sort of the overarching what is OEIB about to why does it matter to them? Because parents are busy, they work, they're raising their kids. They're not going to pay attention to this big policy discussion. They want to know how it fits under a big umbrella, but right away. So, why does it matter? What about this work is important? Is going to make a difference to their specific student or their students' friends or their school or their community? But I can't make that argument and lose people right away. So having tools that make the work relevant would be, at least from my standpoint, most important.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. Mark?
I thought one of the most effective documents recently for me was OEB's one-page Q&A on the Common Core. It was a document that was easily dispensable, that you could cut and paste, that you could send on. So anything along the lines of the consistent one-pagers translated, that can be forwarded right on, are really, really handy, and then you can start conversations. I know Nancy's newsletter is such an easy read, that that's easy to forward on and cut and paste pieces of that to different audiences.
Great, thank you.
I think to back up what Julie just said about the return on investment to the parents, the same thing can be said to the business community or to anybody who you're in front of. I look at it in the picture of an IPO, where even education's been there forever, but we are actually an initial public offering, so to speak. So it has to be fresh. It has to be what's in it for me, what's the return on investment in it for me, why should I be engaged, and kind of resell the whole education process, what the value is of the teachers, what the value is of the communities at large, and it gives us an opportunity to get to know who you're in front of and just press that message.
Thank you.
Yvonne? I was just going to mention one thing along that same line as the one-pagers are the videos. I think all of us could learn more and do a better job of using some of the technology that would be linked to the one-pagers for parents. And not just parents, but the different stakeholder groups. I know that we've been looking, obviously, we all have for all the stuff around Common Core, and there's some great stuff out there for parents. that even there's been apps for them and those kinds of things. I do think, so I was also going to mention that, an app to OEIB. I know we have one for our school district, but there could be an app that really has some targeted information for parents. There's a click on for parents, click on for teachers, click on for students, where you put that information, and of course it would be linked from the website.
Thank you.
I'm really jealous of the gloves. I would like to move that we invest in some heat for the next meeting. What cost? I'm going to bring my own little heater. So when you ask what I need as a board director or board member to be able to do it is, I need a clear, concise message about what's most important that we want to share, and then I need to have an avenue for how I'm going to listen to what they want. Because I'm not interested in going out and just blurting to them. I'm interested in hearing back from them as well. So I think if you can create those avenues, that would be great.
Thank you.
This is Kay speaking, and sometimes the messages of the board members is very unclear on the phone call. But so if this has been said already, I apologize. But for me, I think it's important that we recognize that parents have a different interest in this work than maybe, faculty or business members or other stakeholders in this educational process. For parents, I think what they want to know is that their child, their individual child or children, are receiving an outstanding education. And I think our board has to be able to communicate that message. And I know that's very difficult because parents are very different and their children are very different. But if you talk to parents about what they want to know, it's that, I send my child to school every day, and what I want to know, because of that activity, my child is receiving a high-quality education that will allow him to go on to college or to community college or to be able to get a job. That's what they expect from the OEIB, from the legislature, from the school district, from the superintendent, and from the teacher. They want to know how this all impacts their individual child or children. And that's a message that we must embrace and be able to communicate.
Thank you, Kay.
Samuel.
Two quick points. Dr. Golden was out with, the Welch's time, I think, with the Community College Association, and had a really good two-pager that I think was very effective. And I don't know if you've still got that, Nancy or Kristen, but that seemed to be really effective in terms of communicating, at least with that audience, and it might be worth it. It's a real good diagram and graphic, and the two-pager helps in terms of people getting the message. I think we've got to rethink our role. I think we have to move from being ambassadors to a lot more active participants, and that includes the 20-second elevator speech to other ways of engaging people. And my history in terms of dealing with communities of color is that, and I mean no disrespect or Luddite approach, but it's not through it's not through iPhones or other kinds of techniques. It's face to face and people who are having conversations with each other. And to me, that suggests that we're going to be in some places we can have conversations with people in some different kinds of ways. And we're all busy, we have different lives and all the other kinds of things, but it might be helpful to map out some of the networks of the people who are sitting up here and what are the natural kinds of opportunities for conversations that engage people. And some of that has to be at the level of the 20-second, this is the OIB, not dancing feet, but something that's at a certain level. But then there's got to be the ability to dig deeper and deeper and deeper if that's going to be a part of what we do.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. That's actually something we've talked about at the staff level, is how can we map networks and best leverage them. So thank you.
Anyone else on this topic? If not, I want to commend Nancy for all of her travels and what she's doing to get the message out. Kristen, thank you for this plan.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that too. What was very clear in the data is widespread positive comments about Nancy as a listener. And I think we've all recognized that and known that. But that was, to me, very compelling how widespread that was. And Nancy, when you took this job in the interim role, we talked about, you can recall each one of us, we talked about the importance of getting a communication plan going. And I guess what I see today, all day, starting with the best practices, is the flywheel starting to move. I see a communication plan. I see the database moving forward. I see things starting to creak and move, and that's extremely encouraging, which is something message.
You gotta be careful, Marcus, be asking for an airplane.
Airplanes are not a term I use in my world.
Thanks, Kristen. Okay, let's move on to our agency update, and first up is Rob Saxton.
Chair Spildy, board members, Dr. Golden, Rob Saxton of the Department of Education. I'm here today to give an agency update. Thank you, appreciate that. I'm here to give an agency update on the Oregon Department of Education. I need to keep it fairly brief, and so I'll do my very best to do that, especially since I'm told I'm being timed over there by Ms. Whitney Grubb. So one of the interesting things about doing this is I thought about how do you give an update on what's happening at the Department of Education, because what I'd really like to do is just say a lot. There's a lot going on at the Department of Education, and so one of the things that we've really worked hard to do is to track all the things that we have underway. And so we've developed trackers on the 100 bills that were passed out of the 2013 legislative session, and how the department needs to do work to make sure that those bills are implemented and that the work gets done in a timely fashion as dictated by what was set forth in law. Or tracking our delivery of the progress on the strategic initiatives that came out of House Bill 3232 and 3233. And then more specifically on the strategic plan that we've put together itself for the Oregon Department of Education. I had the opportunity to share that strategic plan with you last year, and it is something that we keep in front of us at the department on a very regular basis. And so I thought perhaps the best way for me to get at this would be to remind you a little bit about the goals that we have set up for the strategic plan. And we have 5 big goals in our strategic plan. I think the one that I'm most interested in, and those you would be most interested in also, are the ones around learners and the metrics that go along with that, like the number of kindergartners ready to enter kindergarten increased by 20%, or the number of third graders reading at grade level increases by 15%, and we close the achievement gap by 5%. And those are the metrics that we have. And then we have set forth a set of objectives underneath each one of those goals. So what you see on the right up there is our goal statement. On the left are our objectives. And then what came up with the check marks next to them are really our strategies that are 6-month strategies. And so we have created strategies for every 6 months that when we accomplish those strategies, we believe take us to our objectives, and our objectives to our goal, and our goal to the outcomes that we've identified within our metrics. These are not all of the 6-month strategies that the department put in place around Goal 1. There are a number of others, probably about 3 times as many as I've put up here, but I know that I would inundate people with information if I put up much more. I would attract your eyes to a couple of these. For example, the very first check mark, that 42,000 students participated in the kindergarten assessment this fall. That was one of our 6-month measurements or strategies, and it's something that we were able to accomplish. Or the third one down, that the strategic investment phases 1 and 2 are completed, and phase 3 is on track to be completed. So those are some of the pieces of work that we're doing under Goal 1. On Goal 2, which is really about effective educators, again, our objectives and 6-month strategies, I'll direct your attention to a couple of those. The second one down, that we've hosted 12 regional workshops on educator evaluation systems with our education partners, who include OEA, COSA, and Chalkboard. Those have been really important as we look at the evaluation systems that we're putting in place for educators across the state. Or the second one from the bottom, the regional peer review panel guidelines and training progress is put in place for 2014. So we'll have regional panels that look at the evaluation systems that have been put in place in each school district and evaluate what those evaluation processes look like, and to make sure that they meet our guidelines. And then, of course, I had to put at least one red one up there, to be honest, that there are some of these that we have not accomplished. And so we are still in the process of putting together the portal on staff development and some of the training, and we have not gotten that accomplished, even though it was one of our 6-month strategies. On goal 3, which is around excellent systems across the state, a couple different ones I'd direct your eyes to, that 100% of focus and priority schools have begun implementing the prescribed corrective action in their CAP indicators. So we have our schools in focus and priority status doing their work. And the next one down, that the Common Core state standards implementation, scaling up and integration is underway across the state. On goal 4, on the 6-month strategies, I would just direct your eyes to the very first 3. We're very pleased that we've increased overall customer service rating to 71% and increased timeliness to 64%. So we've done an external and internal customer assistance surveys, and we're up on our indicators around customer service. I'm not satisfied with those, but I like the trend, and those were the goals that we set in our 6-month strategies. We have released the new school report card, and 100% of the bills for which ODE has responsibility for implementation are assigned to staff, and Priority 1 bills have their work plans in place from out of the legislative session. We've done some work on our website, and that work has gone well. We still need to make a decision on some of our website improvements, which is one of our strategies. And the last one, on goal number 5, our 6-month strategies, and I would look at the third check mark down, that the reorganization is in place and fully implemented, and it is. That 75% of staff report being more integrated in the work that they do, so less siloed at the department, which a 75% positive response on that we think is very good, and we're pleased. And the last one, that ODE's workforce surpasses the state's affirmative action goals, something we've been very specific about and continue to work on. Our next step will be to make sure that we have our next good 6-month strategies in place, and that we continue to meet those, and that any that we have not yet met, that we get those taken care of immediately. So that would be kind of my agency update. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thanks, Ron. Nancy, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about what a terrific relationship we have working together, and how important that is, because we're the what and the why, and you're the how we get it done, and we certainly share those responsibilities, but I couldn't have more faith in someone than you to really work in partnership with the OEIB to get the work done. So we can really multiply our energies by working so closely together. And we have a standing 6:30 a.m. phone call every Tuesday, and I wouldn't miss it for the world, because it really helps make sure we're aligned and on the same page. So thank you. You're setting a real high standard for all of us. You've done a fantastic job keeping up with your deliverables.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. I appreciate that. And I heard Peter Tromba earlier say you can have too many goals, or you can be focused on too many goals, or something like that. I'm in big trouble, because I'm going to have a goal to have fewer goals, I think. I do like to have some. Yes.
So David and then Yvonne.
Yeah, Rob, I know it's been a long day of meetings, but I gotta ask, what's customer service?
So what we have done at the agency really since 2006, I think, is tracked through a survey what our customer service looks like. And so we've asked questions about, are we timely with our responses when you ask us questions? Do we give you accurate information? Is our interaction positive and reasonable? So those kinds of questions. And because it's been tracked for quite some time, we're starting to build up a fairly good database about how we're doing. We have been really specific at the department. We actually put together a group to talk about what customer service really does mean. And what was interesting for us is that we got a lot of feedback about part of customer service is making sure that you give one another good internal customer service so that you're able to serve well your external customers. And so we decided then we needed internal customer service, and we worked with folks within the department to set up a list of really metrics and expectations about what customer service means. We did training on that. Every staff person has a card next to their phone that lays out what their customer service norms are, such as how long before you have to answer an email. What does that mean, and how do you go about that? How do you work on the telephone? Who owns the call that comes in, and how long before that person should have someone get back to them versus giving them someone else to call, those kinds of things.
I just wanted to add on to what Nancy was saying, just to say that the relationship between OEIB and ODE, and by the way, the relationship with our associations, the different educational associations, I think it's done just a huge piece in changing the perception about the work we're doing. There's a belief, I think, out at least in the system itself. There's more confidence in what we are doing, that things will actually happen, good things will happen. And there's clearly a streamlined process. I know in working with some of the people in our ESD region that people don't feel like everyone has to check in or that everyone has to talk to everyone, because there's so much more confidence in what ODE is doing, and that people will get back to us with answers. And if not, there's always an explanation about why. And it's really obvious that OEIB and ODE are working together. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. And thank you, OEIB, for having chosen Nancy. It's fabulous to get to work with her.
Hannah.
I'll just say if you're here to work on it. She's here right on the house.
Anyone else? Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Dr. Rose, Oregon University System.
Chair Spildy and members of the board, thank you very much for the opportunity to brief you on our activities in the Chancellor's office. I think it was last October that I had the opportunity to address you, and as you all know, I think the word that best describes the activities in the Chancellor's office is transition. So you'll hear that repeatedly in my few remarks that I would like to share with you. The one item that I wanted to call to your attention that was not on my list in October is that, as you've read in the papers and have talked to experts across the state, you must be well aware of the fact that we have two campuses who are really facing some very serious financial distress. One of those campuses in Ashland is going through a very formal process that we call retrenchment. And if there are questions about that process or you'd like to know more, I'd be happy to touch on that. But it's a very prescriptive process laid out in OAR and CBA, whereby the institution goes through a series of very reflective and interactive processes to identify places to trim their budget. And there will be implications in that process, surely, to both program and faculty. So if you were to look at a map of my travels in the past several months, there would be a real big dot in Ashland and another one in LeGrand. So LeGrand as well, Eastern Oregon University, is under very serious distress. We are working very, very collaboratively with our partners there, terrific leadership team, who is taking a very hard look as well at their financials. I should say, place this in a little bit of national context for you, that institutions like Southern and Eastern are facing similar situations all across the country. Moody's produced a report, I believe it was last August, that laid out some very bare facts that small regional public universities are under quite a lot of distress nationwide for a variety of very consistent reasons. They tend to have, for instance, fewer revenue streams than our larger research-based institutions. So when you have fewer legs to the stool, you're going to get more wobble when any of those legs is challenged. We see, too, nationally that institutions like these are under downward pressure on enrollment. that is one of their major revenue streams. So like many similarly situated institutions nationally, these institutions are facing some challenging times and they are responding appropriately, and we will see them through this process. So that is where I've been spending the bulk of my time, and I do get on a lot of little planes back and forth to these more far-reaching campuses to help them through these processes. So that's the new update. What I will just remind you very briefly, because I'm between you and the door at this point in the day, is you all know we're actively engaged in supporting the Board of Higher Ed in its process of looking at governance models for the regional campuses. And our role in that, of course, is to shepherd through the process and to provide resource and staffing to what is a very, very deliberative and capacious process. We are right on track. If you've seen our work plan, it's a massive document. Timeline will have us with these 4 institutions before our board to make their pitch for their proposed outcome at the April board meeting. We're right on target with that. There has been a lot of work done, and if you see campus representatives from these 4 institutions, do congratulate them, because it is a heavy lift that their staffs are doing in addition to the work being accomplished in the Chancellor's office. In addition, obviously we're working very closely and very frequently with Ben on the HEC transition. Ben has been a great partner. I think it's been a very collaborative process. Our staff meets with him very consistently to make that transition to some of the statewide activities smooth and on time. I think what we're facing now, I think Ben would probably confirm this, is we're really getting down to brass tacks about which are the items that exist currently in the Chancellor's office for which there's no obvious home going forward. What is the value of those activities to the state, and what are our range of solutions? So an example of that might be the ETIC conversations that have happened, and there we have a potential solution here with OEIB that makes me very pleased. So I think that those conversations are ongoing. I think they're very open communication, and I think we're proceeding apace. Similarly, the institutions that are transitioning out are working very closely with us, and it's hard to describe the depth and the breadth of the work that is required both on the institution's side and on ours to allow these institutions to exit the system smoothly and on time. And Ben has probably heard me use this analogy many, many times, but as a former gymnast, what I like to say about the transition of a large university out is we have to stick our landing.
Hi, Sarah. This is Kate Ram speaking.
There's no wobble really allowed.
It sounds like we did not have Ed Washington's name as my special guest.
Okay, we're hearing you in another conversation.
Okay. It's Ed.
You didn't hear that?
I don't know.
Just proceed.
So, examples, for instance, the 3 institutions that are exiting the system have to make payroll in July of 2014. They have to be prepared to work on their own financial statements. So,
I'm not sure the financial details, but you're talking about. Sure, that's fine.
So these are very critical transitions, as you might imagine, and we want to see these 3 institutions succeed in this new era. So there is quite a lot of work being done, especially by our finance and administration team on that score. I would also say we're planning for the Chancellor's office structure and scope and budgeting and staffing for FY15, and that is also quite an exhaustive process. We estimate that we will be going from roughly 100 employees to about 28, depending on where we land with a variety of activities. So there's a lot of internal work that's being done currently. We have a pretty elaborate communication plan internally, and also a lot of work being done on outplacement services, collaboration with institutions where some of our folks may land. So there's quite a lot of work taking care of our own people during this time of great change. As we approach the session, Our scope in the session, I think, is narrower, certainly by virtue of the change that we're going through. And so as a consequence, our list for session is smaller than it would normally be. Still, we have a capital list that will likely come forward. We also have some work to do on 270 cleanup just to make sure that some of the transitions are very smooth. And we're working with Senator Hass and his omnibus bill to make sure those things are covered to everyone's benefit. We'll be tracking policy bills and acting as a resource, as we always do on higher education matters, and working closely with both the HEC and the governor's office for alignment purposes. So I'll pause there, see if there are any questions from you all.
Questions for Melanie? Well, I'd just like to say thank you for your leadership during this time of transition.
Thank you.
These times are, I'm sure, not easy for an agency in this transition, so
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Okay, I understand there is no public comment. I just want to thank Kate for joining us by phone and all of you for being here, and apologize to you for keeping you late. The only thing I would say in my defense is we had some immediate issues on the agenda and you were very engaged, which I think is a good thing. So thank you. We're adjourned.